Yo, Atlas speaking and welcome to part 11 of What If I Was Reborn into the world of Avatar as the Prince Zuko and took over the world. Let the tale begin. Chapter 121, Guild in the Oasis. The world had shrunk to the size of a prayer. Katara knelt on the soft, impossibly green grass of the spirit oasis, her hands resting gently on Aang's shoulders as he sat in deep meditation, his breathing slow, his face serene. The distant sounds of the siege were a muffled, monstrous heartbeat through the ice, but here, there was only the gentle lap of sacred water and the silent, eternal dance of the circling koi. She was supposed to be guarding him, protecting his vulnerable body while his spirit journeyed. It was the most important duty she could have. But her mind would not obey. It kept drifting, like a piece of flotsam on a dark tide, back to the same, forbidden shore. He's gone. The words echoed, not with the relief they should have carried, but with a hollow, aching finality that felt like a punch to the gut. She stared at Aang's peaceful face, the boy who had just poured his heart out to her, and all she could feel was a confusing, sickening sense of grief for a monster. Tears, hot and shameful, pricked at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, but they welled up again. Why? Her mind screamed at her heart. Why does this hurt? He was your captor. Your enemy. He was going to use you, use Aang, use everyone. He brought this war to your doorstep. And yet, a memory, unbidden and vivid, flashed behind her eyes. Not of a monster, but of a boy in firelit silk, standing terrifyingly close in the oppressive silence of his royal chamber. The scent of sandalwood and smoke. The intense, searching look in his gold-flecked eye as his thumb brushed a stray tear from her cheek. The shocking, confusing warmth of his lips on hers, a kiss that wasn't gentle, but was a claim, a question, a terrifying moment of connection in a world built on their opposition. It hadn't been love. It had been something darker, more possessive, but it had been real. A scar on her soul. Another memory, Azula's cruel smirk in the palace corridor, a crackle of blue energy at her fingertips aimed not at Zuko, but at her. And Zuko, without a word, stepping between them, his own fire a defensive wall. She is mine to deal with, Azula. He hadn't protected her out of kindness, she knew that. It was about control, about possession. But in that moment, against his own sister, he had been her shield. The line between jailer and protector had blurred into something she still couldn't untangle. She saw his cunning face during their late-night conversations, the way his mind worked like a complex clockwork, anticipating moves 10 steps ahead. She remembered the chilling confidence in his voice on the balcony before the escape, "I want you to be my woman." It wasn't a romantic plea, it was the statement of a prince who saw the world as pieces to be arranged, and he had decided she belonged in his collection. That was the heart of it. Zuko had been a force of nature. A glacier of ambition and intellect, moving with deliberate, unstoppable power. He had plans that had contingencies. He had outmaneuvered his father, his sister, an entire nation. He had played the ultimate game and, for a glorious, terrifying moment, he had been winning. And now, he was just gone. Struck down by a bolt of lightning from the very sibling he'd spent a lifetime trying to surpass? It felt wrong. It felt cheap. It felt like the universe had erased a masterpiece with a clumsy smear. All that brilliance, all that terrifying potential, that complicated, infuriating, captivating presence, snuffed out in an instant and swallowed by the indifferent sea. A soft sob escaped her lips before she could choke it back. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. She wasn't crying for the Fire Nation prince. She was crying for the wrongness of it. For the unfinished story. For the ghost of a connection that had been made of chains and fire but had felt, in its own twisted way, more substantial than anything else in the gilded cage. She was mourning the loss of her most understandable enemy, and the terrifying vacuum his absence left, now filled by Azula's pure, uncomplicated malice. She looked at Aang again, her vision blurred. Sweet, brave Aang, who wore his heart on his sleeve, who fought to not kill. He was everything Zuko was not, light to his darkness, air to his fire, compassion to his calculation. and he had confessed his love for her. A simple, honest, terrifyingly pure love from a world that felt a lifetime away from silk sheets and whispered threats in the dark. The guilt was a stone in her throat. How could her heart be so cluttered? How could she mourn a shadow when the sun was right in front of her, fighting for his life and the fate of the world? A single, traitorous tear traced a hot path down her cold cheek and fell onto the grass between them. It was for the kiss. For the protection. For the cunning mind that was now just waterlogged ash. For the terrifying, simple truth she could finally admit to herself in the sacred silence of the oasis. She didn't know what she felt. But feeling nothing was no longer an option. And in the heart of her people's last stand, that confusion felt like the greatest betrayal of all. A sudden rustle in the lush foliage at the edge of the oasis shattered Katara's spiral of thought. Her grief and confusion vaporized, replaced by the razor-sharp instinct of a fighter. In one fluid motion, she was on her feet, water whipping from the pool to encircle her wrists in shimmering, ready coils. Her breath caught, heart hammering. Had the Fire Nation already found the heart of the city? "Who's there?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous, her stance perfect, rooted yet fluid, a master Paco-approved defensive form. "Peace. It's just me." The voice was soft, melodic, and unmistakable. From behind a curtain of hanging vines, Princess Yu emerged, her moon-pale hair and blue silk gown seeming to glow in the ethereal light. She held her hands up, palms open, a gesture of pure non-aggression. Her serene expression was touched with urgency. "I'm sorry to startle you. I was told I would find the Avatar here." Katara let out a shuddering breath, the water around her hands losing its tension and flowing back into the pool with a soft splash. The adrenaline crash left her feeling shaky and exposed. "Princess Yu. You shouldn't sneak up on people like that." "Not now." "I see that," Yu said softly, her luminous blue eyes taking in Katara's tear-streaked face, the tense set of her shoulders. She glided closer, her gaze flicking to the meditating Aang before settling back on Katara with deep concern. "Forgive me. The pathways here are second nature to me. Are you all right?" Katara quickly wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, straightening her tunic. "I'm fine. Just on edge." Aang is in deep meditation. Master Pakka said he needs to speak with his past lives. Yu nodded, moving to sit gracefully on the grass a few feet from Aang, her gaze solemn. "Yes. The moment is upon us." She looked at Katara again, her head tilting. "But you are not merely on edge, Katara. You carry a weight. Did something happen at the breach?" The direct question, asked with such gentle sincerity, was the final crack in Katara's dam. The words tumbled out in a raw, hushed rush. "It's Zuko! The Fire Nation Prince. He's dead." For the first time, Yu's perfect, serene composure broke. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in genuine shock. "Dead? How?" "The wall, the sun he created, it was his power." "It was an execution," Katara whispered, the words tasting like ash. "On the deck of his own ship. His sister, Azula, she had orders from the Fire Lord. They declared him a traitor. For his plans on Kyoshi Island, for letting Aang escape. She used lightning." Katara's voice hitched, betraying her. "She hit him, and he fell into the sea." Yu was silent for a long moment, absorbing the information. Her eyes grew distant, not with shock now, but with a rapid, calculating thought. "A traitor," she murmured. So the fracture was not just spiritual. It was political. The enemy was fighting itself. "It doesn't matter now," Katara said, a flare of bitter anger cutting through her grief. "Azula's in command. And she's worse. She doesn't play games. She just destroys." "Doesn't it matter?" Yu asked, her voice low and intense. She leaned forward. "Katara, think. You knew him. You spent time with him in that palace. Does a mind that cunning, that prepared, truly seem like one that would be caught so flat-footed? Surrounded on his own deck at his moment of triumph? Katara stared at her. Sokka's wild theory echoed in her mind, now given weight by the calm, intelligent princess. Sokka said, he said it could be a trick. That being dead would free him. It would free him from everything, you agreed, her gaze sharpening. His father's leash, his nation's expectations, even the watchful eyes of his sister. He would become a ghost. The most dangerous kind of enemy, one with no allegiances, no face, and nothing left to lose. The idea was terrifying, but it sparked a treacherous, undeniable flicker of hope in Katara's chest. It felt right. It felt like him. But why? Katara asked, her confusion returning in a different form. If he's alive, what's his game now? He wanted the North. He wanted, she glanced at the spiritual pool, this place. Perhaps he still does, you said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she looked at the circling koi. But now, he would take it from the shadows, while his sister and my people bleed each other dry on the walls. It is a colder, more patient strategy. It is the strategy of a man who has burned away his last attachment to the world that named him traitor. The two young women sat in the humming silence of the oasis, the air between them thick with shared understanding and dawning dread. They were no longer just a waterbender and a princess guarding the Avatar. They were two people who had seen the intricate, dark weave of the Fire Prince's ambition, and who now realized the most dangerous thread might be the one everyone thought had just been cut. You reached out and placed a cool, comforting hand over Katara's clenched fist. The boy who hurt you, who confused you, he may be gone, Katara. But the man, the player, the force of nature. I fear he is just beginning his true game. And we are all still pieces on his board. Katara looked from Yu's knowing eyes to Aang's innocent, meditating face. The weight she carried didn't lift, it transformed. The grief for a lost enemy shifted into a chilling vigilance for a phantom that might be more real and more dangerous than ever. Chapter 122, Master Pakka's Onslaught. The ceasefire did not end with a shout or a horn. It ended with the light. The weak, gray dawn that crept over the shattered wall was not the pale blue of a polar morning. It was the color of old bruises and dirty smoke. And in that sickly light, the Fire Nation moved. The first sign was a deep, rhythmic thumping that vibrated through the ice, felt in the bones before it was heard by the ears. Then, monstrous shapes lurched through the gaping hole Zuko had made. They were not ships. They were iron turtles on whirring, clanking treads, their metal hides scorched black. Fire Nation tanks. Their hatches were sealed, and from their snouts, glowing red orbs of concentrated fire began to pulse, building like angry hearts. On the walls and in the streets, Water Tribe warriors braced themselves. The empowering light of the moon was gone, replaced by the harsh, revealing glare of a smoke-choked day. The advantage had shifted. A tank's snout flashed. A sphere of fire the size of a man shot across the canal, not as a wave, but as a compact, screaming projectile. It struck an ice barricade. The ice did not melt. It exploded. Shards like glass knives scythed through the air, slicing into the warriors behind it. The screams were short, cut off by the next explosion. Do not let them advance. Master Pakka's voice roared from a command post, raw with strain. Sink them! The canals are your weapon. Waterbenders, their faces grim, thrust their arms downward. The ice of the main canal beneath two of the leading tanks fractured. But the tanks were heavy, their treads designed for mud and rock. They sank slowly, grinding, but their turrets kept turning. One fired its cannon straight down into the water as it submerged. The superheated water erupted in a geyser of steam, scalding the benders who had tried to drown it. The Fire Nation infantry poured in behind the tanks. No longer in disciplined phalanxes, they came in screaming waves, their armor clattering, their faces twisted with battle fury. They carried not just fire, but spears and swords and axes. The battle dissolved into 1,000 brutal, personal fights. A Water Tribe warrior, clad in furs and bone armor, swung a heavy club at a firebender. The firebender ducked, pivoted, and drove a fist wrapped in flame into the warrior's side. The fur ignited, the smell of burning hair and flesh filling the air. The warrior fell, beating at the flames, and a soldier drove a spear through his chest. Two waterbenders worked in tandem, one pulling a wave from a side channel to douse a squad of advancing soldiers, the other instantly freezing the water solid, trapping them up to their necks in ice. For a moment, it worked. Then a Fire Nation officer calmly walked down the line, placing a hand on each frozen helmet. The ice steamed, then melted in seconds, but the men inside did not move. Their heads had been cooked inside their own armor. Sokka was no longer on the rooftops. He was in the street, his boomerang lost, his club slick with soot and other things he refused to think about. He fought beside a grizzled tribesman named Inutuk. They fought back to back, a pocket of desperate resistance. A firebender lunged at Sokka, a short sword in one hand, fire coiling around the other. Sokka parried the sword strike with his club, the impact jarring his still tender shoulder. He saw the firebender's other hand coming, the flame shaping into a blade. He had no time to dodge. Inutuk's harpoon took the firebender in the throat from 3 feet away. The man gurgled, the fire dying in his hand as he clutched at the bone shaft. Sokka didn't have time to thank him. Another soldier was already there, and Inutuk was turning to meet him. High above, on a broken section of the wall, Azula watched. She stood perfectly still, a statue of red and black amidst the chaos. Admiral Takeda stood beside her, his face grim. "The tanks are effective, Princess, but the city is a maze of canals. We are paying for every yard." "Good," Azula said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Let them pay. Let them spend their lives, their water, their hope. We have more to spend than they do. Press the advance on the central spire. That is where their command will be. Crush it." On the ground, the brutality was intimate. A young waterbender, no older than Katara, tried to form a whip to trip a tank's tread. A soldier shot her in the back with a crossbow. She fell face first into the slush. An old tribesman, too old to bend, stood on a bridge with a fishing net. He threw it over a squad of soldiers, tangling them. For a precious few seconds, they were helpless. Warriors from the alleyways fell on them with knives and clubs. It was ugly, desperate, and effective. The air was a soup of conflicting sensations. The crackling roar of fire. The hiss of water meeting flame, creating billowing clouds of blinding steam. The metallic shriek of tank treads on ice. The cacophony of screams, of rage, of pain, of final moments. The beautiful, ordered canals of the Northern Water Tribe ran red and black. The ice, sculpted for generations, was pocked with scorch marks and slick with gore. The serene city had become a butcher's yard, and the Fire Nation's knives were very, very sharp. The sun, hidden behind the pall of smoke, climbed higher. The waterbenders fought with grim determination, but their power was diminished. They were being pushed back, street by street, canal by canal, by the relentless, grinding machinery of war. The full invasion had begun. And it was not a battle of elements. It was a meat grinder. From his command post, a raised platform of ice overlooking the central junction of 3 main canals, Master Pakku watched the relentless advance. His sharp eyes missed nothing. The exploding ice barricades, the slow, grinding push of the tanks, the way his young benders were being cut down by soldiers who fought with a cruelty he had spent a lifetime pretending did not exist at this pole. A cold, familiar fury, one he had buried under decades of discipline and tradition, began to thaw deep within him. It was the fury of a man watching his home, his legacy, his very culture be methodically fed into a furnace. It was the fury his nephew, Tsu, had accused him of not possessing. His usual precise, elegant forms were for the training yard. For saving a foolish prince from pirates. For teaching a talented, frustrating girl. This was not the training yard. Fall back to the second line. Pakku's voice, amplified by a funnel of ice, boomed across the junction. All non-benders, Clear the central canal. Now! His students and warriors heard the shift in his tone. It was no longer instruction. It was the cracking sound of a glacier preparing to calve. As they scrambled back, Paka stepped to the very edge of the platform. He shed his ceremonial overrobe, letting it fall to the ice. He stood in his simple training tunic, an old master facing the modern engines of Hellpoint 3 tanks clanked into the wide central canal junction, their treads churning the bloody slush. Their commanders spotted him, a single old man. Their turrets began to swivel, the air humming as their fire cannons charged. Paka did not wait. He took a deep, grounding breath, his feet settling into the ice. Then he moved. His opening stance was not a defensive circle. It was a wide, powerful sweep, as if he were gathering the very ocean to his chest. From the 3 intersecting canals, the water did not rise in tendrils or whips. It exploded upward in 3 massive, churning columns, as if the city itself were vomiting its lifeblood to defend its heart. The volume of water was staggering. It was more than any 10 lesser benders could have moved. The tanks, each weighing tons, rocked on their treads as the geysers hit them. Paka's hands clenched into fists. The 3 columns of water, each as thick as a tree trunk, did not fall. They coalesced, swirled, and shot forward like colossal, liquid spears. The first spear struck a tank directly on its front armor with the force of a tidal impact. The iron did not melt. It crumpled. The cannon barrel was bent sideways like a soft reed. The tank was lifted, thrown backwards, and landed on its side with a deafening crash of shearing metal. It did not move again. The second water spear was more precise. It did not strike the tank's body. It shot into the gap between the turret and the hull, a pressurized jet of liquid force. Inside, there was a horrific grinding scream of metal, and then steam, rail steam, from boiled crew and shattered machinery, began to hiss from every hatch and viewport. The tank became a coffin. The third tank fired. Its cannon loosed a blazing orb of fire directly at Paku. The old master did not flinch. With a sharp, downward chopping motion of his right hand, he split the oncoming fireball with a blade of compressed water so thin it was nearly invisible. The 2 halves of the blast dissipated harmlessly to either side of his platform. With his left hand still held aloft, he made a twisting, pulling gesture. The water from the canal beneath the 3rd tank did not rise. It simply vanished, dropping away as Paka bent it all into his control. The tank lurched, its treads spinning in empty air for a second before it dropped 5 feet into the suddenly dry canal bed with a catastrophic crunch. Before its stunned crew could react, Paka brought his left hand down in a fist. The water he had pulled away returned. Not as a wave, but as a solid, plunging hammer. It fell from above, 1,000 tons of water crashing down onto the trapped tank, driving it deeper into the canal bed, flattening it, silencing it forever. For a moment, there was a stunned lull in the fighting around the junction. Fire Nation soldiers stared, aghast, at the wreckage of 3 war machines taken down by 1 man in less than a minute. Paka did not pause to admire his work. The cold fury was fully awake now. He saw soldiers, not just tanks. He turned his gaze on the infantry squad that had been advancing behind the tanks. He shifted his stance, his movements becoming fluid, relentless, and utterly ruthless. He was no longer performing the forms of a master. He was performing the function of a force of nature. He swept his arms in a wide arc. A wall of water, 20 feet high and razor-thin at its crest, rose from the canal and swept down the street. It did not push the soldiers back. It hit them like a moving cliff. Men in heavy armor were lifted and smashed into the ice walls of buildings. The sound of breaking bones was a sickening percussion under the roar of the water. A firebender officer tried to rally his men, launching a sustained jet of flame at Paku. The master flicked a wrist. A tendril of water shot from the main wave, wrapped around the officer's ankle, and yanked him off his feet. He was dragged, screaming, into the depths of the canal and did not surface. Paku advanced. He was not a man walking on ice. He was the epicenter of a localized monsoon. Water orbited him in a deadly whirlpool, lashing out in whip cracks that could slice through leather and break limbs, and crushing waves that pinned soldiers against stone, in precise, freezing jabs that sealed mouths and nostrils in an instant of fatal ice. This was not the defensive, yielding water of his teachings. This was the water that carved canyons. The water that sank fleets. The water that, when focused by a will of iron and a heart filled with cold rage, was the most brutal element on Earth. He was buying time. He was buying space. He was showing the Fire Nation that the Northern Water Tribe was not just ice. It was the relentless, drowning depth. And for the first time in 100 years, its depth had a face, and it was the face of an old, furious master who had finally stopped teaching and started killing. Chapter 123, Return of the Moon. The sun bled its last light into the thick haze of smoke, a bruised and dying orange smudge on the horizon. The battle for the Northern Water Tribe had raged for hours, a grinding, brutal slog of fire and ice and blood. Master Pakka stood at the forward edge of the Water Tribe's crumbling defensive line. His simple tunic was soaked through with sweat and spray, clinging to his lean frame. His breath came in deep, controlled pulls, but a tremor had begun in his hands, a deep, bone-deep ache in his joints. He had been a conduit for immense power for too long. He had crushed tanks, drowned platoons, and held back the red tide with sheer, terrifying will. But he was an old glacier, and even glaciers feel erosion. Around him, his warriors fought with desperate courage, but they were being pushed back, step by bloody step. The Fire Nation's numbers were a crushing, relentless fact. For every soldier Pakka felled with a whip of ice or a hammer of water, 2 more seemed to take his place. The canals he had used as weapons were now choked with debris and bodies, their flows sluggish. His movements, once fluid and explosive, were growing heavier, a fraction slower. He saw a young waterbender fall, a fire dagger in her chest, and his next wave of water lacked its earlier killing force, merely pushing the attackers back instead of shattering them. A Fire Nation captain, seeing the old master's slowing rhythm, rallied a group of spearmen. "He's tiring! Take him now!" They broke from the main line, sprinting across an iced-over side channel, weapons ready. Pakka pivoted, his muscles screaming in protest. He raised his hands to pull water from the canal, but the draw was slow, the response sluggish. The spearmen were almost upon him. Then, the first silvery light touched the highest spire of the palace. It was a subtle change at first. A cool, clean luminescence bleeding into the smoky orange gloom. Then the full moon crested the wall of the city, huge and impossibly bright, a perfect pearl in the violet evening sky. Its light did not push back the dark. It transformed it. It washed over the carnage, turning the blood-black ice to shimmering silver, making the smoke look like ethereal mist. The light touched Pakka. The weariness did not vanish, but it was submerged, drowned in a sudden, breathtaking surge of power. It was not just strength returning. It was as if the ocean itself had breathed into his lungs. The tremor in his hands stilled. The ache in his bones became a distant memory. His chi, which had been burning low, roared back to life, fed by the celestial tide. The spearmen were 5 feet away. Pakka did not pull water from the canal. He did not need to. With a gesture so small it was barely a flick of his wrist, he called the moisture from the very air around the charging men. The humidity of the siege, the sweat on their skin, the dampness in their breath, it all answered him instantly. It condensed around them in a blink, a shimmering sphere of water that enveloped all 6 men. Their triumphant cries turned to muffled, watery screams. Pakka closed his fist. The sphere flash froze with a sound like a mountain cracking. 1 second, 6 men in motion. The next, a single, massive, perfectly clear block of ice, suspended in the moonlight, with 6 figures trapped inside in poses of attack, their faces locked in final shouts. He let it drop. It hit the ice of the canal with a thunderous crash, but did not shatter. It was too dense, too perfectly formed. Pakka turned back to the main battle line. He raised both arms, not in a sweep, but in a grand, gathering pull, as if embracing the moon itself. The response was cataclysmic. The central canal, a wide thoroughfare now choked with wreckage, did not just provide water. It erupted. The very ice of its bed shattered upwards. The water, tons and tons of it, rose not in columns, but in a single, continuous wall. It lifted higher than the surrounding buildings, a sheer cliff of liquid silver hanging in the air, rippling with reflected moonlight, humming with contained power. It was so massive it cast a deep, cold shadow over the entire Fire Nation advance. Soldiers looked up, their faces pale in the lunar glow, their fires seeming like pathetic match sparks against the towering aqua. Pakka held it. The strain was immense, even with the moon's gift, but his will was iron. He was not just bending water. He was holding a piece of the sea itself aloft. With a final, guttural shout that held a century of defiance, he thrust his hands forward. The wall did not fall. It walked. It surged forward as a single, unstoppable entity, a moving tsunami contained within the city's streets. It slammed into the Fire Nation lines with the weight of a falling mountain. Tanks were plucked from the ground like toys and tumbled end over end in the raging current. Soldiers were simply erased, swallowed by the silver fury. The wave carried everything before it: fire, metal, men back through the shattered breach, cleansing the streets in a terrifying, roaring purge before finally crashing out into the Black Sea beyond the wall in a final, booming crescendo of water and foam. Silence descended, broken only by the drip of water and the moans of the wounded. The immediate advance was broken. The ground gained by hours of brutal fighting was lost in a single, moonlit minute. On the flagship, Princess Azula watched the silver wall rise and fall through her spyglass. She did not look angry. She looked fascinated, like a scientist observing a particularly effective predator. "Impressive," she murmured. "Truly. It seems my brother's notes were understated." Vice Admiral Takeda stood beside her, his face grim. "The full moon, Princess. It grants them power we cannot match by conventional means. Our losses during that surge were catastrophic. We must pull back once again and regroup for a morning assault." "Pull back?" Azula lowered the spyglass, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her features. "Once was more than enough. Why pull back when you can simply turn off the light?" She unrolled the scroll in her hands one last time, her eyes tracing Zuko's notations next to a detailed diagram of the city's spiritual heart. "The men I requested are ready? They are assembled on the main deck, Princess. 5 squads of Yin archers, our very best. And Lieutenant G's infiltration team." "Excellent." Azula's eyes glinted in the twilight. "The moon is their strength. It is also a single, glaring point of failure. With this scroll, I know exactly where to go. Follow me. We will take care of this moon thing once and for all." She did not march. She glided down the gangplank to the main deck where 40 archers stood in perfect, silent rows, their bows already strung, their quivers full of black-fletched arrows. Lieutenant G and a dozen commandos in dark, non-reflective armor waited beside them. "No torches," Azula ordered, her voice cutting through the night. "No firebending unless absolutely necessary. Move with silence and purpose. Our target is the spiritual heart of the city. The source of their power. We are going to pluck out its eye." She led them off the ship and into the corpse-littered, waterlogged streets of the outer city. They moved like ghosts, avoiding the main canals where Water Tribe patrols now moved with renewed, moon-fed vigor. Azula navigated the labyrinth with unsettling confidence, the stolen scroll a perfect map in her mind. They slipped through shadows, over icy rooftops, through narrow alleys reeking of smoke and death, heading unerringly inward, toward the most guarded place in the north. In the spirit oasis, the air was still warm, still thick with the scent of earth and flowers. The roar of Pakka's moonwave was a distant rumble here, like thunder over a faraway mountain. Katara and Princess Hugh sat on either side of the meditating Aang, their vigil tense and silent. The moon's light here was not just light, it was a physical presence, a gentle pressure that made the waters of the pool glow and the spiritual energy hum. Katara's mind, for the first time in hours, was quiet. The moon's serenity here was infectious, a balm on her conflicted soul. She watched the circling koi, there danced the heartbeat of her world. Yu sat with perfect stillness, but her eyes were watchful, scanning the verdant walls of the grove. She felt the moon's power as a song in her blood, but beneath it, a discordant note of dread, as Kuruk had warned. "Well, look what we have here." The voice was familiar. It was dry, calm, and it came from the entrance of the oasis. Both young women spun, water rising to Katara's hands in an instant, Yu stepping in front of Aang. He stood there, framed by the archway of living ice. No armor. No crown. Just simple, dark travel clothes, damp at the edges as if he had been swimming. There was no sign of a lightning scar, no hint of injury. His hair was loose, falling around his shoulders, and his single gold eye reflected the moonlight with a sharp, intelligent clarity. He looked not like a prince who had just fought a war, but like a scholar who had just solved a complex puzzle. Prince Zuko took a single step into the oasis, his hands held loosely at his sides, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "I have to admit," he said, his gaze sweeping over the pool, the spirits, the meditating avatar, and finally settling on Katara's shocked face. "I didn't think this would be so easy." Chapter 124, The Prince in the Garden. The world inside the spirit oasis seemed to stop. The gentle lap of water against the shore, the soft rustle of alien leaves, even the ethereal glow of the moon above, it all faded into a silent backdrop for the figure standing at the entrance. Katara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart, which had been a steady, anxious drum, gave one violent, painful lurch. The water she had summoned trembled around her fists, losing its form and dripping back into the pool. He was here. He was alive. And he looked calm. Terribly, impossibly calm. Princess Yu recovered first. She did not step back. She shifted her stance, placing herself more squarely between Zuko and the meditating Aang, her chin lifted with a regal defiance that seemed borrowed from someone much older. "Prince Zuko," she said, her voice cool and measured, cutting through the thick silence. "The reports of your death were exaggerated." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched Zuko's lips. He took another step into the oasis, his movements smooth and deliberate, like a predator entering a new territory. His gaze drifted past her, over her shoulder, to where Aang sat in serene stillness. The Avatar, he observed, his tone one of mild curiosity. Consulting his predecessors. A wise move. Given the circumstances. His eyes flicked to Katara, and the intensity in them was like a physical touch. "Hello, Katara." Her name in his mouth was a shock. It was not the cold water tribe girl of before, nor the possessive my muse. It was just her name, spoken with a familiarity that felt more intimate than any title. She found her voice, though it was raw and thin. "You're supposed to be dead." "I am aware of what I'm supposed to be," he replied, his gaze still holding hers. "It's a surprisingly liberating state of affairs. No more expectations. No more loyalties to manage. Just purpose." "Your sister struck you with lightning," Katara pressed, the memory of the scout's report vivid in her mind. "You fell into the sea." "The sea is cold," Zuko said simply, as if commenting on the weather. "And lightning is just concentrated energy. Both can be navigated with the right preparation." He offered no more explanation than that. The mystery was a wall around him. His attention returned to Yu, his head tilting slightly as he studied her. "Princess Yu. The heart of the Northern Water Tribe. I've heard much about you. Your connection to the spirit of the moon is unique." You did not flinch. "It is a sacred bond. One you will not understand, Fire Prince." "Perhaps not," Zuko conceded, his tone thoughtful. "But I understand value. I understand power. And I understand when something is being wasted." His eyes drifted back to the pool, to the circling koi fish. To ATLA. His expression was one of profound, almost scholarly focus. A source of life, sealed away in a garden. A power that moves oceans, used only to defend a single city. It's like using a master swordsmith's blade to chop vegetables. It is our way, you said, her voice hardening. It is balance. It is not for you to judge. Balance, Zuko repeated the word, tasting it. He finally looked away from the spirits and back at the two young women. Your city is burning. Your people are dying in the streets. Your balance is being hacked apart by my sister's Boothiels. Where is the balance in that? He took another step closer. He made no aggressive move, but his presence seemed to fill the small space, pushing against the oasis of serenity. You are both so focused on what you are protecting. The Avatar. The spirit. The tribe. His gaze settled on Katara again. You never stopped to ask what you could be building. What are you building, Zuko? Katara asked, her voice trembling not with fear now, but with a confusing rush of anger and something else. You let everyone think you were dead. You let this invasion happen. For what? To skulk in shadows and give speeches? For the first time, a genuine emotion other than calm calculation flashed in his eye. A spark of something fierce and hungry. To be free, he said, the words low and charged. To operate without the leash of a throne I don't yet hold, or the blind obedience of a nation that fears my father. My sister believes she is finishing my conquest. She is merely clearing the board. Creating a vacuum. He looked at Aang again, his expression unreadable. The past is a record of failures as much as victories. I am more interested in the unclaimed future. He turned fully to face Katara, ignoring you for a moment. You asked me my goal, once. In the palace. I gave you an answer you didn't like. My goal now is simpler. It is to ensure that when the dust of this war settles, the world that remains is one worth ruling. Not a scarred wasteland, not a frozen monument. A world with its foundations intact, but its leadership changed. His words were riddles wrapped in shadows. He spoke of ruling, but he had just faked his death to escape his crown. He spoke of a world worth ruling, but his sister was currently butchering its people. You're talking in circles, Katara said, her fists clenching at her sides. You always do. You say just enough to confuse, to make people think you're deeper than you are. Zuko's faint smile returned. Am I confusing you, Katara? Before she could answer, a new voice, sharp as a shard of ice and laced with venom, cut through the oasis from the opposite entrance. Oh, I doubt he confuses her, brother. I think she understands you perfectly. They all turned. Princess Azula stood at the other archway, flanked by Lieutenant G and a squad of Yin archers, their bows silent but their arrows nocked. Her golden eyes swept over the scene, taking in Zuko, the princess, the Avatar, and finally, Katara, with a look of pure, triumphant malice. She understands, Azula continued, her smile widening into something predatory, that you are a ghost who overstayed his welcome. And that I am here to send you back to the spirit world for good. The arrival of Azula and her archers should have been a shockwave, a violent disruption of the tense standoff. Instead, the air in the oasis grew even more still, more charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Zuko did not startle. He did not even turn his head fully. His gaze merely slid from Katara to acknowledge his sister's presence with a slow, deliberate tilt of his chin. A look of profound, almost bored unsurprise settled on his features. Azula, he said, the name a flat statement. You're late. I expected you half an hour ago. The moon has been up for some time. Azula's victorious smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes, sharp as daggers, scanned him, looking for the lie, the bluff. She found none. He stood there, exposed and calm, as if he had been waiting for her. Late, she echoed, her voice losing some of its silken menace, gaining an edge of irritation. You arrogant little ghost. I'm here to end the farce of your existence. I knew that little farce wouldn't kill you. I just didn't expect to see your face so soon. I have your scroll. I know what this place is. Of course you do, Zuko replied, his tone that of a tutor correcting a slow student. I left it for you. Did you think you found it tucked in your bunk by accident? You were always better at following a trail than blazing one, Azula. I needed you to find this place. I needed you to bring your best archers right here, to this exact spot. Lieutenant G shifted uncomfortably behind Azula, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. The Yin archers, trained to be emotionless, exchanged the briefest of glances. They were not part of a surprise attack. They were pieces being moved onto a predetermined square. Katara stared at Zuko, her mind reeling. He had planned for this. All of it. His death, Azula's takeover, the invasion, even Azula finding the oasis. He had orchestrated every single moment, leading them all here like puppets. You wanted me here? Azula's voice was low, dangerous. The concept was an affront to her, a violation of her narrative of control. Naturally, Zuko said. He finally turned his body to face her fully, placing himself between the two groups, Azula's soldiers on one side, Katara, you, and the unconscious Aang on the other. He was the pivot point. This was the only way to get everyone in the same room. You, with your mandate from Father and your need to prove yourself. The Avatar, seeking salvation from the past. The Princess, guardian of the spirit. And Katara. He glanced back at her, and for a moment, his mask of icy control slipped, revealing something far more complex. The variable. The one who could never be fully predicted. He looked back at Azula, his expression settling into one of cold certainty. You think you're here to kill a ghost and steal a power source. You're not. You're here because I required an authentic threat. A genuine, raging fire to force certain reactions. To make certain choices inevitable. He spread his hands slightly, a gesture that encompassed the glowing pool, the archers, the sisters, the princes. Now that everyone is here, the real plan can begin. The oasis was silent. The only sound was the gentle, eternal swirl of the koi fish in the heart of the pool. Azula's fury was a palpable heat, warring with the oasis's spiritual chill. Yu's face was a mask of dawning horror at the depth of the manipulation. And Katara felt a cold clarity wash over her. He had never been their enemy in the simple way they thought. He had been the architect of the entire catastrophe, building a cage of fire and ice not to destroy them, but to arrange them. For what purpose, she still couldn't see. But the terrifying truth was now undeniable. They were all exactly where Prince Zuko wanted them to be. Chapter 125, Theft, Betrayal, and Revelation. The silence that followed Zuko's declaration was shattered by his own movement. He turned his back on Azula, on Katara and Yu, as if they were of no more consequence. His focus was the pool. From within his simple, damp tunic, he withdrew not a weapon, but a container. It was a hollow gourd, dark and polished, sealed with a wax stopper. He knelt at the water's edge, the sacred koi fish swirling unperturbed just inches from his hand. With a reverence that seemed at odds with everything he was, he uncorked the gourd and submerged it. The spirit oasis water, glowing with its own inner light, filled it. He stood, lifting the gourd. For a moment, he looked at the water within, his reflection shimmering on its luminous surface. Then, with a resolve that seemed to shut out the entire world, he raised it to his lips and drank. He did not sip. He drank it all, a long, continuous pull that emptied the gourd. The effect was not immediate. He lowered the container, his expression one of intense concentration. Then, a shudder racked his frame, a violent, full-body spasm that made his knees buckle for a second. He caught himself, one hand going to his chest. His breathing became ragged, plumes of frost and steam mixing in the warm air. Veins stood out on his neck and temples, his skin flushing then paling. It looked less like healing and more like a violent internal war, as if the primordial energy of the moon and ocean was a live wire thrust into his core. A low groan escaped his clenched teeth. His good eye screwed shut in agony. Then, as suddenly as it began, the storm within him subsided. The tremors stilled. His breathing evened out, deeper and slower than before. He opened his eye, and it seemed to shine with a colder, clearer light. He exhaled, and a look of profound, almost ecstatic relief and pleasure smoothed his features. He looked at the empty gourd in his hand, then back at the pool. The pain was gone, replaced by a terrifying, palpable sense of power thrumming just beneath his skin. Without hesitation, he knelt again. This time, he did not use the gourd. He simply held his hand over the water. A stream, thick as his wrist and glowing like liquid moonlight, rose in a perfect arc and coiled itself into a second, identical container he produced from his belt. He sealed it, the sacred water now his to keep. Only then did he acknowledge the others again. His gaze, now sharper and more penetrating, swept over Lieutenant G. Lieutenant G, Zuko said, his voice carrying a new, resonant depth. It's been a while. Or should I say, Lieutenant? Commander? G, who had stood stiffly beside Azula, did not meet his eyes at first. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he bowed. Not to Azula. To Zuko. The infiltration back into service was a success, Prince Zuko. Your instructions and messages were all delivered by Rin and Lee in time. The betrayal crashed over Azula in a visible wave. Her composure, her cruel smirk, vanished, replaced by raw, stunned disbelief. Her own subordinate. Her eyes darted between G and her brother, the architecture of her control crumbling. Zuko ignored her spiraling fury. Secure the Water Tribe Princess, he said to G, his tone now one of casual command. We will go on to our agreed-upon place soon. Without a word, G gestured. The Yuan archers, their loyalties now horrifically clear, shifted their aim. Their arrows were no longer trained on Zuko or the Avatar. They pointed at Katara and Yu. Four of G's commandos stepped forward, their movements efficient and cold, moving to flank Princess Yu. Katara threw her hands up, water rising from the pool, but a dozen bowstrings creaked in unison, aimed at her heart. She froze. Yu did not struggle as the soldiers took her arms. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a furious, luminous light. This is sacrilege, she whispered, the words meant for Zuko. He didn't even look at her. Archers, he commanded. Anyone else entering this place, kill them. The final order, given so calmly, broke Azula completely. You planned this with my men? Her voice was a strangled scrape. You used my invasion, my victory. Zuko finally turned his attention to her. He did not speak. He simply walked towards her, each step measured and heavy with the authority he had just stolen back. The aura around him was no longer that of a fugitive or a ghost. It was the chilling, absolute aura of the Fire Prince, in full command. He passed her by as if she were a piece of furniture, his focus elsewhere. He stopped before the still, meditating form of Aang. He looked down at the young boy, his expression unreadable. I know you're there, Zuko said, his voice low but carrying. The charade is over. It's time we talked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Aang's eyes snapped open. But they were not Aang's eyes. They glowed not with the white light of the Avatar state, but with a fierce, ancient silver-blue light, the color of a winter sky. His Airbender tattoos pulsed with the same ethereal luminescence. When he spoke, the voice was layered, powerful, and utterly female. Is that you, Rava? Zuko asked, noticing the slight difference. How do you know that name? Zuko did not flinch. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face, followed by swift recalculation. Rava. I expected Kuruk. Not the third herself. The being inhabiting Aang Raya stood. The movement was not Aang's playful agility. It was a slow, deliberate uncoiling of immense, dormant power. I sensed the death of an avatar and came to prevent it, the ancient voice stated, the words resonating in the oasis's air. The death of the avatar? Zuko asked, his earlier confidence faltering for the first time. His mind raced, his eyes widening as the implication struck him. Aang was to die. Here? Tonight? If it was not you, Raya intoned, Aang's head tilting, who would be capable of such a thing? Zuko thought for a single, crucial second. The pieces clicked, Azula's mission, the archers, the scroll, the target not being him but the spiritual heart, a blow meant to cripple the water tribe and kill the Avatar in one stroke. He whirled around, the truth dawning on him. But he was too late. Azula, enraged, humiliated, and seeing her entire plan usurped, had seen only one path to victory. While Zuko spoke to the ancient spirit, she had begun the forms. Her fingers traced the separating circle in the air, her body a conduit for deadly charge. The crackle of building energy filled the oasis. Her face was a mask of pure, focused hatred, aimed not at Zuko, not at the Avatar, but at the source of all their power, the pool, the koi, the heart of the moon itself. A killing blow meant to shatter the world. Aang, or rather, Raya, simply raised a finger. It was not a bending form. It was a gesture of absolute, effortless authority. From that fingertip, a single, precise bolt of pure white lightning, thinner and brighter than Azula's blue, lanced across the space. It did not roar. It sounded. It struck Azula not in the chest, but in her outstretched right arm, at the epicenter of her own generating energy. There was no grand explosion. There was a sickening pop and sizzle of fat, a flash of blue-white light swallowed by the cleaner, fiercer white. Azula was thrown backwards as if yanked by a wire. She landed in a heap against the base of an icy wall, her arm bent at a hideous, wrong angle, blackened and smoking. A thin wisp of acrid smoke rose from her uniform. She did not move. The oasis was silent again, save for the hum of Raya's power. Zuko stared, his mind blank for a full 3 seconds, at the smoldering, crumpled form of his sister. The clever, vicious, formidable Azula, reduced to a broken, smoking doll by a flick of a finger from a 12-year-old boy possessed by a 10,000-year-old ghost. A raw, animal sound tore from his throat. He turned on Raya, his composure incinerated by a shockwave of pure, undiluted rage. "What the fuck did you do?" he roared, the fire in his voice hotter than any flame he had ever bent. Chapter 126, The Forced Retreat. The smell of burnt cloth and ozone hung over Azula's still form. Zuko's roar of fury at Raya died in his throat, choked off by a more immediate, primal imperative. His sister. Broken. Smoking. All calculations of plans and power dynamics vanished. The ghost prince moved, dropping to his knees beside her with a haste that was almost clumsy. Her right arm was a ruined, blackened thing. Her breath came in shallow, ragged hitches. The cool, analytical part of his mind, the part that was Victor Crane, assessed, severe electrical trauma, possible cardiac arrest imminent, systemic shock. He didn't have medical equipment. He had only stolen power and brutal practicality. He yanked the second gourd from his belt, the one still full of the glowing spirit oasis water. He pried Azula's slack jaw open, ignoring the way her head lolled. "Drink, you stupid, brilliant fool," he snarled, not in anger, but in a desperate command. He poured the luminescent water into her mouth, forcing her to swallow. He watched her throat convulse. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, a soft silver light seemed to emanate from within her, tracing the paths of her veins beneath her skin. The horrific, charred flesh of her arm did not heal, but the terrible waxy pallor of her face gained a faint, living hue. Her next breath was deeper, less strained. The water was stabilizing her, fighting the death the lightning had sown inside her cells. It wouldn't save the arm. It might have just saved her life. He stood up, the empty gourd falling from his fingers to the grass. The fear for her life receded, replaced by a colder, more focused fury. He turned to the being wearing Aang's face, his single eye blazing. "Are you willing to make me your enemy, Raya?" The question was not a shout. It was a low, deadly demand, vibrating with a promise of endless, meticulous vengeance. After all I have done to prove myself not your enemy, you dare? The ancient avatar stared back, Aang's features set in an expression of detached, celestial judgment. You do not have the right to speak like that to me. You do not belong to this world, Victor. The use of that name, his true name, here in this sacred place, felt like a physical violation. I should have realized it a long time ago, Raya continued, the layered voice echoing. Your presence here is all a part of his plan. Your very insertion into this world, your being drawn to meet Yogan, it is all part of the design. You are an anomaly, but a cultivated one. You do not belong here. And it is about time I made you leave it. The air around Aang's fingertip crackled once more. Not with the chaotic energy of Azula's rage, but with the concentrated, inevitable force of a divine decree. Pure white lightning, the judgment of an era, coalesced. Zuko did not flinch. He took his stance, not the wide, grounding form for defense, but the sharp, channeling posture Iroh had drilled into him for one purpose only. His fingers came up, ready to greet the killing light. The bolt lanced out. It was faster, cleaner, purer than anything Azula could produce. It struck Zuko's outstretched fingers. Agony. A white-hot scream of energy tried to shred his nervous system, to vaporize him from the inside out. But he was not trying to contain it. He was a conduit. He let it flood into him, a tsunami of voltage, and with a guttural cry of effort that tore from his very soul, he whirled, dragging the captured lightning with him in a blazing arc, and thrust it away, out, into the thick ice wall surrounding the oasis. The impact was deafening. A section of the ancient wall, 20 feet across, vaporized into a blast of superheated steam and flying shrapnel, leaving a gaping, smoldering hole open to the night. In the echoing aftermath, as steam rolled through the oasis, he heard a voice scream in awe. It was Katara. He turned. Aang, or rather, Raya, stood poised, another finger raised, her intent clear, a second, finishing bolt. But she never released it. A massive block of ice, jagged and hastily formed, encased her from the knees up to her shoulders in an instant, trapping her arms at her sides. The lightning at her fingertip fizzled and died, starved of its conduit's motion. Standing behind her, hands still thrust forward, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror at her own actions, was Katara. Zuko stared, stunned. In all his intricate forecasts, in every branch of every contingency, this was the one variable he had never truly accounted for, Katara attacking the Avatar to save him. The ice block cracked. Hairline fractures spread across its surface. Raya's power was not so easily contained. She was melting it from within, and her rage would be biblical. Go! The word was a whip-crack of command from Zuko, breaking the stunned paralysis. He sprinted to Azula, hauling her unconscious form over his shoulder with a grunt. We have to go, now. G, grab the princess. Lieutenant G moved without question. He and 2 commandos seized Princess Yu. She fought, a wildcat in silks, screaming, kicking, biting. You cannot. This is sacrilege. Release me. Katara, move. Zuko yelled, turning to where she stood frozen, staring at her ice prison. She didn't move. She was locked in a horror of her own making. There was no time. Zuko shifted Azula's weight, dashed to Katara, and in one motion, threw her over his other shoulder. She gasped, but didn't struggle, her body limp with shock. Archer! The princess! Zuko barked. A nearby Yuyan soldier slung his bow and took Azula's dead weight from Zuko. Zuko adjusted Katara on his shoulder, his mind a crystal-clear map of escape. Through the breach! Go! Go! His retinue, traitors and kidnappers all surged toward the steaming hole he had blasted in the oasis wall. They disappeared into the chaotic night of the besieged city, leaving the spirit oasis in ruins. Behind them, the block of ice holding the Avatar exploded outward in a shower of droplets. They did not fall. They hung in the air around Aang, glittering in the moonlight. His eyes glowed, not with one voice, but with a choir of them, Raya, Kuruk, Kyoshi, Roku, dozens more, a cascading thunder of ancient wrath. The voice that spoke was the unified verdict of the Avatar cycle. We will meet again, Victor. The water droplets froze into 1,000 needle-sharp points, then fell harmlessly to the ground as the glow receded, leaving only Aang's eyes, wide with the echo of that collective fury. For now, the last whisper of the voices faded into the wind. It is time the Fire Nation learned what the Avatar really is. Aang's expression firmed, the boyish uncertainty burned away in the forge of ancestral rage. He turned and walked, not with a child's gait, but with the deliberate stride of a sovereign, out of the shattered oasis, into the heart of his city. The full moon shone down, its light no longer just waterbending power, but a mandate for retribution. The massive counterattack was no longer a defense. It was a judgment. Chapter 127, The Power of the Avatar. The Avatar stood at the shattered edge of the spirit oasis, where the sacred walls met the city's pain. The gentle hum of the place was gone, replaced by a deeper vibration, a thrum in the air itself. It was not coming from the moon. It was coming from him. He did not run. He walked. Each footfall on the ice-claimed street was deliberate, a sovereign surveying a domain under assault. The distant clamor of battle, the shouts, the roar of flames, the screams, which had been a chaos of noise, now resolved itself into a map of suffering in his mind. He could feel the push and pull of every desperate water whip, the guttering panic of each defender, the greedy, consuming heat of the advancing fire. He reached the central canal junction, the place where Master Pakku had made his stand. The water here was churned and filthy, littered with the wreckage of war and worse. Fire Nation soldiers, seeing a lone boy in orange and yellow, a target, broke from their platoons and charged. Aang did not look at them. He raised a hand, palm open, not in a fist. It was a gesture of invitation. The canal did not just rise. It unfolded. A wall of water, wide as the canal itself and thrice the height of the surrounding buildings, peeled itself from its bed with a sound like a continent sighing. It did not crash. It simply stood, a sheer, shimmering cliff of liquid, defying gravity, reflecting the full moon's light and the city's fires in a terrifying mosaic. The charging soldiers skidded to a halt, their fury turning to gibbering terror. They looked up, and up, at the impossible aqua. Aang closed his palm. The wall leaned forward and fell. It was not a wave. It was an avalanche made of sea. It did not knock the soldiers down. It enveloped them, swallowed them whole, and kept moving. It filled the street from wall to wall, a solid, rushing mass that scoured the stone and ice clean. When it receded, pulling back into the canal with a deep, groaning suction, the street was empty. Not a body, not a weapon, not a scrap of cloth remained. They were simply gone. He walked on, following the path of the invasion towards the Great Breach. The Fire Nation, sensing a new, catastrophic threat, turned their machines of war on this single, small figure. From the decks of the closest ironclads anchored in the harbor, and from siege engines repositioned inside the wall, the air tore with the THWOM of heavy catapults. Not flaming boulders now, but specialized rounds, spheres of compacted, burning pitch, canisters that shattered on impact to spread clinging fire, massive, blunt stones meant to crush. The first volley darkened the sky, a swarm of fiery meteors and deadly shadows descending upon the Avatar. Aang stopped. He looked up. He brought his hands together in front of his chest, then swept them out and around in a great, sweeping circle. Every drop of water in the nearby canals, every trickle of meltwater, every ounce of moisture in the frozen air, answered the call. It streamed towards him, a billion converging threads, weaving themselves into a spinning, colossal vortex of water that encased him. It was a whirlpool standing on end, a furious liquid tornado. The projectiles hit it. The burning pitch spheres plunged into the churning wall and were extinguished with furious hisses, vanishing into steam and black, harmless sludge. The fire canisters shattered against the water's relentless motion, their contents diluted and drowned before they could ignite. The massive stones were caught, spun violently around the vortex's perimeter like pebbles in a sling, and then, with a final, whip-crack surge from Aang, were hurled back the way they had come. They smashed into the catapults that had launched them, into the decks of ships, into groups of firebenders. The retaliation was precise, impersonal, and devastating. From the decks of the flagship Inferno's Heart, Vice Admiral Takeda watched through his spyglass, his blood turning to ice. Concentrate all fire. Every bender, every engine. On that boy. He must be the spirit they worship. Kill it! The order went out. A coordinated barrage the likes of which the Northern Water Tribe had never seen. Concentrated jets of fire from 100 benders merged into a roaring, continuous stream of orange-white hellfire. Catapults thumped, trebuchets groaned, launching their payloads in a unified storm of annihilation aimed at the vortex. Aang, within his spinning sanctuary, felt the pressure. The heat was immense, boiling the outer layers of his water shield into a cloak of scalding steam. The impacts were constant, a drumbeat of attempted murder. He ceased his circular motion. The vortex collapsed. But the water did not fall. It gathered. It piled upon itself in front of and around Aang, rising, shaping, growing. It was no longer a shield. It was becoming a monument. A form. Legs of swirling, solid current, as thick as temple pillars, stamped down, cracking the ice of the square. A torso of churning, powerful water rose, taller than the highest spire. Arms, long and vast, ending in hands of cascading fluid, unfurled. And above it all, a head, featureless, smooth, save for the glowing white eyes that now burned where Aang's own had been, and the arrow of water, stark and blue, that swept across its brow and down its back. The Avatar had not summoned a spirit. He had become one. A giant of living water, an engine of tidal fury wearing the shape of a man. The unified fire stream hit the water giant's chest. It did not pierce. It created a vast, hissing cloud of steam, but the giant did not falter. It took a step forward, a seismic tremor passing through the city. One of its massive hands swept down, not as a fist, but as a falling lake. It engulfed an entire Fire Nation battalion and the 2 tanks they sheltered behind. The hand closed. When it opened and lifted, there was only a slick, empty patch of ice. The men and machines were at the bottom of the harbor. Panic, pure and undiluted, broke the Fire Nation lines. They broke and ran, a red and black tide fleeing back towards the breach, towards their ships. The water giant was not done. It strode towards the harbor, its steps causing geysers to erupt in the canals with each footfall. The ships in the bay, the proud armada, turned their engines to flee, to bring their weapons to bear. The giant reached the shattered edge of the wall. It leaned over, its immense, featureless face regarding the fleet below. One arm rose high above its head, fingers spread. From the black ocean itself, a column of water wider than 10 ships broadside rose in answer. The giant brought its arm down in a chopping motion. The column of water became a blade. A cleaver of the deep. It fell across the midsection of the lead ironclad, the Ember Fong. There was no explosion of wood. The ship was simply cut in two, as if by the axe of a god. The severed halves bobbed for a surreal moment before the weight of their engines dragged them under, sucking down hundreds of screaming men in a whirlpool of their own making. The giant's other hand shot out, fingers extending into 5 torrential jets. They speared through the night, each jet finding a different ship. They did not push. They pierced, punching through iron hulls like paper, flooding holds, dousing furnaces, dooming vessels from the inside out. Ships listed, dead in the water, as dark shapes began leaping from their decks into the freezing sea. On the walls and in the streets, the warriors of the Northern Water Tribe had long since stopped fighting. They stood or knelt, their weapons fallen from numb fingers. They were not witnessing bending. This was mythology made flesh. This was the stories of the first benders, of the Avatar's covenant with the world, playing out before them. Many fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the blood-stained ice, not in fear, but in awe-stricken worship. This was their avatar. This was their vindication. Tears of relief and terror froze on their cheeks. Master Paku, leaning heavily on a broken spear, watched the water giant turn its gaze on the remaining, scrambling ships. He saw not a monster, but a force of nature finally, fully awake. He saw the end of the siege. The giant raised both hands now, palms facing the chaotic fleet. The very bays seemed to inhale. Then, with a final, silent command from the small boy at its heart, it exhaled. A wave rose. Not from the shore, but from the center of the harbor, as if the ocean floor had been pushed upwards. It was a hill of black water becoming a mountain, lifting every ship, friend and foe alike, on its terrifying slope. It crested, and then it broke, not towards the city, but outwards, towards the open sea. It was a tidal expulsion. The wave gathered the Fire Nation armada, the shattered, the whole, the sinking, in its grasp and hurled it back, out through the broken wall, into the darkness of the open ocean. The sound was a deep, final thunderclap of water meeting water at a monumental scale. When the waters settled, churning and foaming, the harbor was empty of black hulls. Only flotsam, wreckage, and the silently returning tide remained. The water giant stood silhouetted against the moon for one more moment. Then, like a collapsing waterfall, it dissolved. The millions of tons of water fell back into the bay and canals with a roar that was the last echo of its power. In the center of the now soaked square, Aang stood alone. The glow had faded from his eyes and arrows. He swayed, his small body utterly spent, and then his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the wet ice, unconscious, as the first stunned cries of victory and lamentation began to rise from the people he had saved, and utterly terrified, with the wrath of the ocean itself. Chapter 128, The Phantom Fleet. The world was a labyrinth of blue darkness and echoing panic. Zuko ran, Katara a weight of stunned silence over his shoulder, Azula a dead, smoking burden carried by a Yuyan archer whose breath came in sharp, pained gasps. Lieutenant G and two commandos half-dragged, half-carried a thrashing, furious princess who through the chaos. Her screams of sacrilege, and "the spirits will drown you," were muffled by the glove G finally pressed over her mouth, his face grim with the necessity of it. They moved not through the city's grand canals, but through its veins. Icy service tunnels, carved by generations of waterbenders for maintenance, now served as their escape route. The air was frigid and stale, their footsteps a frantic, slapping rhythm against the slick ice floor. Behind them, the distant, cataclysmic roar of the Avatar's water monster and the screams of a breaking fleet were a muffled dirge. Katara hung limp, her mind awhirl with the image of her own hands flash-freezing the Avatar. To save Zuko. The wrongness of it was a physical sickness. She saw the archer carrying Azula, the princess's burnt arm dangling, and felt a twist of nauseating pity for the girl who had just tried to murder a spirit. Zuko navigated without hesitation, his internal map flawless. He took turns into progressively narrower, darker passages, the sounds of battle fading until there was only their ragged breathing and Yu's stifled protests. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel began to slope downward. The air grew colder, damper, carrying the salty, rotten scent of a secluded sea cave. A faint, phosphorescent glow from luminescent algae began to light their way. The tunnel ended at a crude, heavy door of soaked timber and rusted iron bands. Zuko didn't knock. He kicked it, once, twice, with a force that cracked the old wood. It swung inward with a groan. They spilled out into a cavern of breathtaking, hidden scale. It was a natural vault in the ice cliff, open on one side to the black Arctic Sea, shielded from the open ocean by a towering, jagged curtain of rock. The water within was still, ink-dark, and currently hosting a sight that stole the breath from even G. Two ships were moored at a rickety, ancient dock. The first was the Bloodwind, Captain Su's infamous vessel. It looked like a predator nursing its wounds, its dark sails furled, its hull scraped and battered from the voyage north, but its lines were still lean and deadly. The second was a Fire Nation vessel, but unlike any in the official fleet. It was smaller, a fast corvette, its hull painted a matte, non-reflective black from waterline to topsail. Its chimneys were cold, its decks dark. It bore no markings, no flags. It was a ghost ship. And standing on its deck, looking down at them with expressions of profound relief, were Sergeant Rin and Ensign Lee. Zuko lowered Katara gently to the icy ground of the cave floor. She stumbled but stayed upright, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. The Yuan archer laid Azula down with surprising care against a crate. "You made it," Zuko said, his voice a hoarse scrape. It wasn't a question. "Barely," Rin called down, jumping onto the dock with a thud. He looked harried, a fresh cut on his cheek. "Your directions were about as clear as mud, Prince. The Weeping Cliff faced south of the third glacial calving. You know how many Weeping Cliffs there are out there? And they're all calving." Lee descended more gracefully, adjusting his spectacles. "I was able to cross-reference your cartographic annotations with pre-war whaling charts recovered from Kyoshi. The margin of error was still significant. We located the cove only 4 hours ago. You're here." "That's what matters," Zuko said, his gaze already moving past them to the Bloodwind. "The secondary package?" "Secure and prepped, just as you specified," Rin said, jerking a thumb towards the black Corvette. "Cruise minimal. Handpicked. They don't ask questions." G finally managed to get Princess Yu to stand still, though she trembled with rage and cold. Her luminous eyes darted between the ships, the pirates, the Fire Nation soldiers, finally landing on Zuko with pure, undiluted hatred. "What is this?" she spat, her voice shaking. "A den of thieves and traitors?" "It's a boarding area," Zuko replied flatly. He walked to the edge of the dock, peering out at the dark slot of sea that led to freedom. "And you are a vital component." Before she could retort, a new voice echoed through the cavern, rich with mocking amusement. Well. Look what the blizzard blew in." Captain Tsu emerged from the shadows of his own ship's gangplank. He was dressed for the cold in a heavy seal leather coat, his bearded face cracked with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Ira flanked him, silent and observant, while the rat-like youth and the two brutes loomed behind. Tsu's gaze swept over the assembled group, the unconscious Azula, the furious Water Tribe princess, the stunned Waterbender, the elite Fire Nation soldiers. His eyes lingered on Zuko. "Got yourself a real collection, Prince. A broken doll, a spirit princess, and your own personal water witch." He took a slow step forward. "And here I was, thinking our business was just about smuggling and sabotage." "The terms of our agreement stand," Zuko said, turning to face him fully. The weariness from the oasis was still there, but it was buried under a resurrected layer of command. "You provided the distraction at the secondary harbor to allow me to sneak into the city without being detected. You got your payment. The scroll promised you clearance and a future favor. Nothing more." Tsu chuckled, scratching his beard. "A favor from a dead prince is a funny currency. But seeing as you're not as dead as everyone's cheering, I'm recalculating the interest." His eyes flicked to you again, gleaming with avarice. "That one, for instance. She's worth more than a fleet of your black ships." G's hand tightened on Yu's arm. Rin and Lee subtly shifted their stance. Zuko didn't move. "She's not part of the deal." "Everything's part of a new deal," Tsu said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was more threatening than a shout. "See, I did my job. I pulled your little puppet strings. But the board's changed. The Avatar's gone mad. The Fire Nation's getting its teeth kicked in by a tidal wave with a kid's face. My exit strategy just got complicated." He spread his hands. "A little extra insurance seems fair. The girl comes with me. Call it a hazard bonus." No, the word was absolute. Tsu's grin faded. "You're in no position to argue, boy. You're on the run. You've got wounded. You've got baggage." He gestured dismissively at Katara and Azula. "You need my ship to get past what's left of the blockade out there of Fire Nation ships. My price just went up." The tension in the cavern spiked. The Yuan archers, sensing a new threat, nocked arrows with silent efficiency. Su's crew gripped their weapons. Zuko took a step towards Su, closing the distance. The memory of their last confrontation on Kyoshi's beach hung between them, the white-hot saber, the hovering sun. "You're right," Zuko said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The board has changed. But you've misread it." He leaned in slightly. "You think I need your ship to escape? Look again." He gestured to the sleek, black corvette. "That ship has engines your grease monkeys couldn't comprehend. It can outrun anything in these waters, in silence. You think I brought you here to ferry me? I brought you here because your presence, your very recognizable ship, is the perfect decoy. While the water tribe and what's left of my sister's fleet are looking for the Bloodwind, I'll be gone. A ghost." Su's face darkened. Ira placed a cautioning hand on his captain's arm, but Su shook it off. "You used me as bait," he snarled. "I used you according to our agreement," Zuko corrected coldly. "You were paid for a service. The changing circumstances are your problem, not mine. You can stay here and argue with me while the Avatar's wrath closes in, or you can take your ship and your crew and vanish, as you're so good at doing. But the princess stays with me." He held Su's furious gaze, unblinking. "The only thing you're getting from me is the same thing I am, a head start. Choose." For a long, charged moment, it seemed Su would choose violence. His hand twitched towards the pistol at his belt. The cavern held its breath. Then, a sharp, pained groan cut through the silence. Everyone turned. Azula was stirring, her good hand clutching her blackened arm, her face contorted in agony. Her eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain and confusion, before sharpening into recognition and rage as she saw Zuko and the pirates. Su looked from Azula's broken form to Zuko's unyielding face, then out to the cave entrance, where the sounds of distant, apocalyptic waterbending were a faint but growing rumble. The calculus of survival overrode his pride. "This isn't over," he growled, the promise thick in the cold air. "It is for today," Zuko said, turning his back, a dismissal of epic finality. "Get your ship ready to sail. You have 5 minutes before we detach the dock lines." Cursing under his breath, Su spun and barked orders at his crew. They scrambled back aboard the Bloodwind, casting hostile glances at the Fire Nation group. As the pirates retreated, movement on the deck of the black corvette caught Katara's eye. Figures emerged from the shadows. Women. Clad in green and gold armor, their faces set in lines of grim determination. The Kyoshi warriors. 4 of them, including Reina and Meika. They had been waiting silently this whole time. They looked at Zuko and gave sharp, respectful nods. They were not prisoners. They were part of the crew. Katara's mind, already overloaded, short-circuited. Zuko's secret army wasn't just Fire Nation. It was the very people he had forced into political marriage. They were here, loyal, or bound by something even she couldn't understand. Lee approached Zuko, speaking low and fast. "The spirit water samples are secured in the forward vault, under cryolock. The engineering team reports all systems optimal for silent running. The other item from Kyoshi is prepped in the lab, as you requested." Zuko nodded. "Get everyone aboard. The princess goes to the secured quarters. Azula to the infirmary. Post 2 guards on each, warriors you trust absolutely." His eyes found Katara, who was still staring, lost. "Escort her to my quarters." "Your quarters, sire?" Lee asked, a flicker of surprise breaking through his professional demeanor. "She stays with me," Zuko said, his tone leaving no room for debate. He finally looked at Katara, and for a moment, the mask of the calculating prince slipped, revealing the exhausted, determined young man beneath. "We need to talk." As G and the Kyoshi warriors efficiently moved you and Azula onto the corvette, and Rin supervised the final cast-off preparations, Zuko stood alone for a moment on the dock. He looked back into the dark tunnel that led to the city, to the chaos he had engineered and then fled. He heard the final, titanic crash of the Avatar's fury. A city was being saved. A legend was being born. And he, the Prince of Fire, was slipping away into the darkness, not with conquest, but with a stolen princess, a broken sister, a conflicted waterbender, and the seeds of a plan that was only now beginning to truly unfold. The Bloodwind's engines coughed to life, the sound echoing in the cavern. Su was making his choice. Escape. Zuko turned and walked up the gangplank of his black ship. Behind him, the lines were cut. The Phantom Fleet, one ship of furious pirates and one ship of ghosts, began to move, gliding silently out of the hidden cove and into the storm-racked, Avatar-ravaged night. Chapter 129, Zuko's Master Plan. The door to the corvette's small, utilitarian command cabin hissed shut, sealing out the ambient noise of the ship's awakening systems and the distant, fading roar of the Bloodwind's engines. Inside, the air was close, smelling of ozone from the spirit water containment units and the sharp, clean scent of polished metal. Zuko stood before a chart table, not looking at the maps, but at his own hands, still faintly trembling from channeling Azula's lightning. Sergeant Rin leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his usual irreverence replaced by a watchful tension. Lieutenant Commander G stood at attention, but his posture was that of a man reporting from the edge of the known world. "So," Zuko said, his voice a low rasp in the quiet room. "Where are we headed, G?" "Not the Earth Kingdom." "Not yet." G took a slow, deep breath, the kind a man takes before diving into deep, uncharted waters. "It is as you wanted, my prince. We used the resources and leads you, appropriated from the Royal Archives and the Spirit Library. Cross-referenced with the recovered whaling charts and seismic surveys from the Southern Raiders' old logs." He reached over and unrolled a smaller, denser chart on the table. It was not a map of nations, but of ocean currents, deep-sea trenches, and strange, swirling eddies marked with archaic symbols. "We found the waters," G confirmed, his finger tapping a point far to the west of the Fire Nation, deep in an area marked the unending gyre. "One is around, as the legend said. A migratory path." The readings matched the descriptions of islands that move against the tide, crowned with stone forests. "It's the closest we've ever gotten." A spark, fierce and hungry, ignited in Zuko's tired eyes. "Good. You found a great lion turtle." The confirmation hung in the air, a mythical truth made real. They weren't just hunting for a weapon or a hiding place. They were hunting for one of the ancient, world-shaping progenitors of bending itself. Although, G continued, his voice tightening, there was an issue with the secondary location. The other potential site, based on the folktales of the Sun Warriors and the geomantic resonance maps, it's not in remote waters. He moved his finger across the chart, stopping at a point unsettlingly close to the Western Fire Nation archipelago. "It's here. In the Leviathan's Run, just outside the formal naval patrol borders, but well within the sphere of home fleet influence." A heavy, tense silence descended. Rin uncrossed his arms, pushing off the wall. "That spells trouble, Your Majesty. That's not just risky waters. That's our backyard. If the thing is even half as big as the stories say, and it's that close, someone in the Admiralty has to know. Or sense it." Zuko stared at the marked location, his mind racing. The risks were astronomical. But the potential. "It's also the last place they'd expect us to look," he murmured, almost to himself. "And the closest to a source of compatible energy." He looked up, his expression settling into one of resolute, almost frightening calm. "It will be fine. We proceed to the primary site in the gyre first. We confirm the method, the approach. We take what we can learn there." He traced a line on the map back towards the Earth Kingdom. "Then, we return to Kyoshi. We camouflage the ship, resupply, and let the world continue to think I'm nothing but shark food." A grim, knowing smile touched his lips. "The Fire Nation will be licking its wounds from the most humiliating naval defeat in its history, orchestrated by the Avatar. Ozai will be scrambling to contain the political fallout, to explain how his golden princess lost an entire fleet. The nobles will be whispering about his weakness. And Azula, he glanced towards the door, as if he could see through to the infirmary. She is out of the picture. They will be looking for external monsters, not internal ghosts. They won't have the attention to spare for little ol' me poking around our own forgotten corners. His confidence was a cold, formidable thing. He had factored in his own humiliation and death, and now he was factoring in the Fire Nation's trauma and distraction. Everything is going accordingly, Zuko stated, his voice gaining finality. He looked from Ji to Rin, his gaze intense. Soon, very soon, I will have everything I need. Not just to challenge a throne, but to rewrite the rules of the game itself. To bring this world, kicking and screaming if necessary, to a new order. One not built on their fragile balance or my father's petty tyranny, but on understanding. On control of the very foundations. The ambition in the room was so dense it felt like pressure. Rin swallowed, his loyalty warring with the scale of the madness. Ji simply bowed his head, the perfect soldier accepting a mission that stretched into the realm of myth. All right, gentlemen, Zuko said, the moment passing, his tone shifting to one of dismissal. Get back to your women. Try to get some rest. We have a long voyage ahead into unconventional waters. Rin shifted awkwardly. She's not here, Your Highness. He didn't need to specify who. His woman was back on the base they left before the invasion, a cornerstone of the government Zuko had left behind. Zuko blinked, the human reminder momentarily piercing his shell of grand strategy. Right. Of course. He looked at Ji. I guess it's just you, Commander. Finally getting to see yours. A flicker of something, weariness, concern, perhaps a sliver of warmth, crossed Ji's stern face. Reyna was aboard, one of the Kyoshi warriors standing guard right now. Their marriage, like all the others, had begun as a political calculation. What it was becoming was anyone's guess. Good night, gentlemen, Zuko said, turning back to the chart, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the navigational instruments. But remember. Stay vigilant. We are not safe just because we are hidden. We are at our most vulnerable when we think we've won. Rin and Ji bowed and exited the cabin, leaving Zuko alone with his maps and his colossal, terrifying plans. The black corvette, nameless and silent, sliced through the frigid black water, leaving the burning, victorious, shattered North Pole behind, a fading nightmare in its wake. 5,000 miles away, the sun was a bleeding ember on the horizon, setting the sky above the Fire Nation capital on fire. But the true fire was gathering in the heart of the city, in the immense, ancient arena of Agni. It was a colossal bowl of black basalt and red granite, its tiers carved to hold tens of thousands. Tonight, they were full. A low, expectant hum vibrated through the air, the collective breath of half the city's population, every noble family, every military dignitary, every minister and sage. They had come not for a spectacle, but for a seismic event. The rumors had spread like wildfire through the caldera, the return of a ghost, a challenge to the throne, a duel for the very soul of the Fire Nation. Torches by the thousands lined the arena rim, their flames whipped by the evening wind into frantic, dancing banners of light and shadow. In the highest royal box, draped in silks of deepest crimson, Fire Lord Ozai sat upon a portable throne. His face was a mask of imperial calm, but his golden eyes burned with a contained, murderous fury. The public challenge could not be refused. The ghost had to be exorcised publicly, or the myth would consume the monarchy. Across the arena, in the challenger's archway, a figure stood in shadow. No armor. No royal silks. Just simple, dark travel clothes. Lu Ten. The prodigal son. The ghost prince. He stared out at the sea of faces, at the man who had taken his father's throne, and his expression was one of cold, serene certainty. This was not about anger. It was about destiny. A deep, resonant gong sounded, once, its notes swallowing the murmur of the crowd. Silence fell, absolute and profound. On the sandy floor of the arena, lit by the horizontal rays of the dying sun and the vertical spears of torchlight, Ozai rose from his throne and descended the steps to the battleground. His regal robes were gone, replaced by a duelist's garb, simple but immaculate. His every move spoke of absolute, unquestioned power. The gong sounded a second time. Lu Ten stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The world held its breath. The sun's lower rim kissed the horizon. What was about to begin was not a duel. It was an Agni Kai for the ages. A fight not just for a crown, but for the history of a nation, set to conclude as the sun vanished, leaving only fire to light the way. Chapter 130, The Battle of Dragons. The silence in the arena was not the absence of sound. It was a held breath, a pressure that strained the very air. The final, fading note of the gong was swallowed by it, leaving only the crackle of 10,000 torches and the dry, hot wind sighing through the stone tiers. Fire Lord Ozai stood at the center of the sand, a statue of contained annihilation. His hands were loose at his sides, but the air around them shimmered with heat haze. His gaze was fixed on the archway, not with hatred, but with the cold appraisal of a master regarding a flawed imitation. Lu Ten stepped fully into the arena light. He moved with a predator's grace, but it was a different kind of predation than Ozai's. Where the Fire Lord was a volcano, Lu Ten was a forest fire, relentless, spreading, consuming. He did not take a dramatic stance. He simply stopped, facing his uncle, and gave a slight, mocking tilt of his head. No official spoke. No herald announced them. The challenge had been made. The acceptance was their presence. The only ritual left was fire. Ozai moved first. It was not a dramatic flare. It was a flick of his wrist, precise and effortless. A thin, whip-like strand of fire, hotter than a forge and white at its core, lashed out across the sand. It didn't roar, it hissed, cutting through the air faster than a crossbow bolt, aimed not at Lu Ten's body, but at the ground before his feet. A statement. A test of reflexes. Lu Ten didn't dodge. He stamped his forward foot. A wall of solid, roiling orange flame erupted from the sand, meeting Ozai's white whip head-on. The collision was a thunderclap of superheated air that blew back the hair of the front-row nobles. The whip shattered against the wall, but Lu Ten's defensive flame was carved in two, dissolving into scattered embers. The first exchange. A probe met and countered. Ozai's expression did not change. He shifted his weight, a movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible. From that shift came power. He drew one hand back and thrust it forward, palm open. A tidal wave of fire erupted. Not a wave, a tsunami. It was a solid, churning front of orange and gold, 20 feet high and twice as wide, roaring across the arena with the sound of a crashing glacier. It wasn't meant to be dodged. It was meant to erase. It consumed the space between them in an instant, the sheer volume of it breathtaking, a display of raw power meant to remind everyone present why he was Fire Lord. Lu Ten did not try to match volume with volume. He dropped low, spinning on the ball of one foot. As he spun, he drew his arms in a tight, controlled circle, pulling the very air and heat around him into a vortex. The oncoming tsunami of fire hit his spinning vortex and was guided, split into two roaring rivers that tore past him on either side, scorching the arena walls behind him with twin black scars. Sand turned to glass an instant, jagged sheets. Before the last of Ozai's fire had dissipated, Lu Ten was moving. He used the momentum of his spin, launching himself forward in a low, sliding charge. As he slid, he punched forward with both fists in rapid succession. Not waves, but lances. Concentrated, spiraling bolts of deep yellow fire, each the size of a man's torso, screaming towards Ozai with pinpoint accuracy, one at his chest, one at his leading knee. Ozai didn't retreat. He pivoted, his own hands moving in a blur. He slapped the first lance aside with a contemptuous backhand of flame, the projectile deflecting upwards to explode against the protective grating above the royal box, raining sparks down on the shrieking nobles. The second lance he met head-on with a clenched fist, punching through its core and dissipating it in a burst of harmless heat. But Lu Ten was already upon him. The slide ended in a sweeping kick aimed at Ozai's ankles, a crescent of solid flame extending from his heel. Ozai leaped, the fiery crescent passing beneath him. In midair, he twisted, and a devastating downward hammer fist of compacted fire smashed towards Lu Ten's head. Lu Ten rolled, the hammer blast cratering the sand where he'd been, spraying molten silica. He came up firing, a relentless, staccato barrage of fireballs from his fingertips, each one a searing bullet of intent. Pop, 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 pop. The air became a deadly grid of superheated projectiles. Ozai became a blur of motion. He didn't just block, he danced. He weaved between some, deflected others with sharp, knife-edged gusts of fire from his palms, and absorbed one directly on his crossed forearms, the impact making him skid back a foot in the sand, his robe smoldering. A gasp went through the crowd. He had been hit. The first blood, drawn not by the Fire Lord, but by the ghost. A flicker of annoyance, quickly buried, crossed Ozai's face. The game was over. He planted his feet, took a breath that seemed to draw the light from the torches, and unleashed his will. The arena burned. Not with one technique, but with a dozen. From Ozai's form erupted a simultaneous, impossible storm of fire. A net of crisscrossing fiery lashes shot forward to entangle. A rolling wave of flame followed to crush. From above, a rain of fist-sized meteors of fire began to fall, targeting Lu Ten's every potential dodge path. It was overwhelming, cacophonous, a symphony of destruction conducted by a master. Lu Ten's eyes widened. He gave ground, his own bending becoming a frantic, brilliant defense. He became a whirlwind. His arms were blurs, creating circular shields that vaporized the net, kicking up walls of flame to blunt the wave, using precise, jet-like bursts from his palms to blast the falling meteors off course. The arena was a chaos of colliding infernos, a kaleidoscope of orange, yellow, and white. The heat was so intense the distant spectators felt their skin prickle, smelled their own hair beginning to singe. But he was being pushed back. Step by step. Ozai's assault was relentless, each technique flowing into the next with flawless, brutal economy. He was a furnace with a mind, his fuel an endless well of power and technique. Lu Ten's defense was genius, but it was reactive. He was a brilliant tactician, but Ozai was the strategy itself. Finally, Lu Ten saw an opening. As he deflected a particularly dense meteor shower, Ozai, for a fraction of a second, reset his stance to launch the next wave. Lu Ten took his chance. He abandoned defense. He poured every ounce of his chi, every drop of his resentment, into one, final, desperate attack. He crossed his arms over his chest, then flung them outward in a wide, all-encompassing arc. From that arc billowed a wall of fire, but not like Ozai's. This was a phoenix. A vast, spreading, avian shape of roaring flame, wings wide enough to brush the arena walls, a beak of concentrated white heat aimed directly at Ozai. It was beautiful and terrifying, the culmination of a lost prince's fury. Ozai saw it coming. For the first time, he showed something beyond cold control. He showed contempt. He didn't try to match the shape. He didn't try to dodge. He took one step forward, into the heart of the oncoming phoenix, and clapped his hands. The sound was not of flesh on flesh. It was the sound of a continent cracking. A shockwave of pure concussive force, wreathed in a shell of blinding white fire, exploded from his palms. It met the phoenix head-on. The magnificent shape did not dissipate. It shattered. The concussive blast ripped through it like a stone through a painting, scattering its form into a million dying embers that were then consumed by the shell of Ozai's own fire. The blast wave continued, unimpeded, and struck Lu Ten square in the chest. He was lifted off his feet. The air left his lungs in a sickening whoosh. He flew backwards, a ragdoll in suddenly tattered clothes, and landed in a heap 30 feet away, skidding through the glass-strewn sand until he came to a stop at the base of the arena wall. Silence. Smoke and the smell of ozone curled in the air. The torches guttered in the aftermath. Ozai stood amidst the devastation, his breathing slightly elevated, a sheen of sweat on his brow. A single, thin trail of smoke rose from his sleeve where a stray ember had landed. He looked down at his own hand, flexed it once, then let it fall to his side. He did not approach the fallen lieutenant. He simply turned his gaze upwards, to the royal box, to the stunned faces of his nation. The message was clear. The challenge had been met. The ghost had been put down. But on the sand, Lu Ten stirred. A groan escaped his lips. His body was burned, his clothes charred, but he was alive. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, his eyes, glazed with pain and defiance, locking onto Ozai's turned back. It was not over. The sun had set, but the embers still glowed. Chapter 131, The Battle of Dragons 2. The sight of Lu Ten pushing himself up from the sand, smoke curling from his scorched tunic, did not spark fury in Ozai. It ignited a colder, more focused emotion, professional disdain. The ghost was proving not just resilient, but irritating. The public spectacle had served its purpose, his power was unquestioned. Now, it was time to end the farce with finality. Ozai did not speak. He took a single, deep breath, the air around him visibly warping with the intake of heat. This was not the breath of a man gathering strength. It was the breath of a forge stoking itself to melting point. He raised his right hand, fingers spread, and made a simple, grasping motion towards the arena itself. The response was not a stream of fire from his palm. It was the arena answering its lord. From the sand at his feet, from the very stone of the walls still radiating heat, from the torches lining the rim, fire was pulled. It streamed towards him in thick, roaring rivers of orange and gold, coalescing into a swirling, churning maelstrom that encircled him from knees to shoulders. He stood at the heart of a personal tornado of flame, its light painting the stunned faces of the crowd in stark, flickering relief. The volume of it was staggering, a localized star burning on the sand. Lu Ten's eyes widened, his defiant smirk faltering. This was beyond technique. This was dominion. With a gesture like a conductor commanding an orchestra, Ozai thrust both hands forward. The fire tornado did not launch. It unfolded. It became a tidal wave, yes, but this wave had teeth. Its crest was not a smooth curve but a seething, snapping maw of 100 distinct, serpentine heads of flame, each one lashing out independently, seeking purchase. It did not roar in a single voice, but in a horrifying chorus of hisses and shrieks. It filled the arena's width, leaving no room to sidestep, and advanced with the inevitable, grinding speed of a lava flow. Lu Ten knew he could not stop it. He could not deflect at all. His mind, trained in survival, calculated furiously. As the multi-headed fire tsunami loomed, he dropped into a low crouch, slamming his palms onto the superheated sand. He did not pull a wall from the earth. He created a trench. A narrow, deep channel of concentrated fire-bending force blasted the sand from directly in front of him, creating a sunken gully. As the tidal wave reached him, its lowest, most concentrated mass poured into the trench. The sand flash vitrified into a tunnel of glass around the river of fire, containing and channeling the devastating energy harmlessly beneath and around him for a crucial second. But the wave was vast. The upper heads, the snapping maw, came crashing down. Lu Ten erupted from his crouch. He became a spinning top of pure defensive fury. His arms and legs were blurs, each movement a sharp, precise blast of flame that met an incoming fire serpent head-on, detonating it in a puff of sparks and concussive heat. Pop! Hiss! Crack! The sounds were rapid, percussive, desperate. He was a man standing under a waterfall of fire, using his own flames as an umbrella, being driven back step by shuddering step, each blocked impact vibrating through his bones. He was holding. Just barely. Ozai watched from within the dissipating remnants of his own maelstrom, his expression one of detached analysis. He saw the strain in Lu Ten's shoulders, the slight tremor in his blasts. The defense was brilliant, a masterclass in reactive bending, but it was a dam against an ocean. He decided to increase the pressure. As Lu Ten was fully engaged with the last lashing heads of the wave, Ozai moved. Not to attack directly, but to set the stage. He took 3 swift, gliding steps to his left, his movements eerily silent amidst the cacophony. As he moved, he traced a wide, slow circle in the air with his right hand, his left hand held close to his chest, fingers poised. The air in the arena changed. The chaotic heat began to coalesce, to gather along the path Ozai's hand had drawn. A faint, oppressive hum layered over the roar of flames. The hairs on the arms of every spectator stood on end. Lu Ten blasted the final fire serpent apart and gasped for air, his chest heaving. He felt it too, the static charge, the gathering of a different kind of power. His eyes snapped to Ozai, who had completed his circle and now stood with his left arm extended, index and middle finger pointed directly at him. Between Ozai's right hand, held palm open by his ear, and his left fingertips, a crackling, spitting arc of white-blue energy snapped into existence. Lightning generation. The ultimate expression of fire-bending control, of cold, absolute power. Ozai's face showed no strain, only perfect, chilling focus. He was not separating the energies in a frantic bid for power, he was calmly, deliberately, unweaving the world's energy to suit his will. Lu Ten had no time for the proper form. No time for the separating circle. He did the only thing he could. He threw himself into a frantic, sideways dive as Ozai's fingertips flashed. The lightning bolt was not the wild, forked spear of Azula's rage. It was a straight, clean, incandescent line of pure destruction. It tore through the space where Lu Ten's heart had been a microsecond before, blasting a crater the size of a wagon into the arena wall behind him with a sound that was less an explosion and more the sky being torn in half. Shards of molten stone sprayed outward. Lu Ten hit the sand, rolled, and came up already moving, because Ozai was already generating again. The Fire Lord's movements were economical, seamless. The circle reformed in half the time. Another bolt lanced out. This one Lu Ten did not fully avoid. He twisted, and the searing energy grazed his left thigh. There was no burn. There was a numb, cold line of oblivion traced across his flesh, followed a heartbeat later by an agony so profound it was soundless. His leg buckled. He cried out, stumbling, the scent of his own cooked meat filling his nostrils. Ozai advanced, a statue of impending doom. He did not generate a third bolt. Instead, he combined them. As Lu Ten limped backwards, favoring his deadened leg, Ozai unleashed a new assault. With his right hand, he sent forth a continuous, rolling river of fire, forcing Lu Ten to defend, to put weight on his injured leg, to stay in one place. With his left hand, held low, he began the lightning forms again, slower now, a deliberate, sadistic telegraphing of the finishing blow. Lu Ten was trapped. He battered at the river of fire with his own weakening blasts, his movements growing sloppy, his breath ragged sobs. Each step sent jolts of white-hot pain from his leg to his spine. He saw Ozai's fingers beginning to glow, the crackle building. He was out of space, out of tricks, out of strength. Ozai's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. The lightning was ready. The river of fire pinned the ghost in place. It was over. He released the lightning. But Lu Ten, in his final moment of desperation, did not try to dodge. With a scream that was equal parts pain and defiance, he did something insane. He stopped fighting the river of fire. Instead, he reached into it. Not to block it. To steer it. He took the edge of Ozai's own rolling river and, with a last, gut-wrenching pull of his chi, bent its trajectory not towards himself, but upwards, into the path of the oncoming lightning. The bolt of pure energy struck the concentrated stream of fire. The result was not an explosion, but a cataclysm. The lightning supercharged the fire, transforming it into a whirling, expanding sphere of plasma, a miniature, unstable sun that detonated with a flash of light that blinded everyone in the arena and a concussive whump that knocked spectators from their feet. The blast threw both combatants back. Ozai skidded 10 feet, his robes scorched, his perfect composure finally broken into a snarl of surprise. Lu Ten was hurled like a doll against the far wall, hitting it with a sickening crunch before slumping to the sand. Silence, deeper than before, broken only by the ringing in 10,000 ears and the slow drip, drip of molten stone. Smoke and strange, ozone-tinged steam filled the arena. The sand was a blasted wasteland of glass and craters. Slowly, painfully, Lu Ten moved. He pushed himself onto his hands and knees, then, trembling violently, onto one knee. His clothes were in tatters, blood streamed from a gash on his forehead, and his left leg was a ruined, blackened mess. Burns crisscrossed his arms and chest. But he was alive. And he was looking at Ozai, not with fear, but with a wild, blood-streaked grin. Ozai straightened, brushing ash from his sleeve. He was panting slightly, a single lock of hair had come free from his topknot. A minor burn marred his cheek. He looked mortal. For the first time in the duel, he looked like a man who had been in a fight. He began to walk forward, each step deliberate. The air around his fists began to glow once more, not with lightning, but with a dense, concentrated fire so hot it burned silent. This would be the end. A close-range, incinerating blast that would leave no ghost to rise again. Lu Ten watched him come, his grin not fading. He coughed, a wet, ragged sound, and spat a gob of blood onto the glass at his feet. He slowly, agonizingly, pushed himself to stand. He wavered, his ruined leg threatening to collapse, but he locked his knee, bracing himself against the wall. Ozai stopped a dozen paces away, the silent, white-hot fire wreathing his hands. Lu Ten lifted his chin. His voice, when it came, was a broken, rasping thing, but it carried to the highest tears, filled with a lifetime of bitter pride. "Is that all?" he croaked. "Is that all the great Fire Lord Ozai has to show?" He took a shuddering, deep breath, his body trembling with the effort. "I think," he snarled, blood flecking his lips, "it's about time you learned why you were never the real Fire Lord." Before Ozai could react, before he could unleash the final fire, Lu Ten did not attack. He did something else entirely. He slammed his fists together against his own chest, right over his heart, and threw his head back. A raw, guttural shout tore from his throat, not of pain, but of invocation. And from the ruined, battered shell of his body, a different kind of fire began to rise. Chapter 132, The Black Dragon of Infamy. The silence after Lu Ten's shout was not empty. It was dense, charged, a vacuum before the storm. The fire that rose from him was not strange in color, it was the deep, bloody orange of coals at the heart of a forge, but its intensity was wrong. It did not flicker. It seethed. It poured from his chest, from his mouth, from his eyes, not as separate jets but as a single, congealing aura of radiant hate. The sand at his feet did not blacken, it turned to a shimmering, red-hot slurry. Ozai's composure, the mortal anger from a moment before, vanished. It was replaced by the cold, calculating fury of a master whose domain was being challenged. He did not speak. He inhaled. The very light in the arena dimmed as he pulled the heat from the torches, from the molten stone, from the superheated air itself into his lungs. The temperature in the upper rows suddenly plummeted, a shocking chill that made spectators gasp, even as the arena floor began to glow. He was not drawing power, he was commanding the environment to yield it to him. He attacked first. There was no testing blow. He slammed his foot down. A wave of fire did not roll forward, the entire arena floor in front of him, a fan 50 feet wide, erupted upward in a solid wall of flame 10 feet thick. It wasn't an attack, it was a cataclysmic event, the very ground rebelling. It surged toward Lu Ten with the sound of a mountain tearing itself apart. Lu Ten met it not with defense, but with greater offense. He didn't bend. He punched. A single, piston-driven fist forward. From the seething aura around him, a concentrated spear of fire, so dense it appeared liquid, shot forth. It did not try to break the wall. It tunneled through it, boring a molten hole straight down the center. Lu Ten charged behind his own spear, through the tunnel of his own making. He emerged from the other side of Ozai's cataclysm wreathed in the clinging tails of the Fire Lord's own fire, his clothes smoking, his skin blistering, but his momentum unstoppable. He was inside Ozai's range. Their first exchange was not bending, but brutal, fire-enhanced close combat. Lu Ten led with a flaming elbow. Ozai deflected it with a forearm sheathed in a compact, white-hot shield that sizzled against Lu Ten's skin. Ozai countered with a knife hand strike, fingers tipped with razor-thin flames. Lu Ten twisted, the strike grazing his ribs, parting flesh and tunic with a sickening hiss. He ignored it, driving a knee wreathed in a burst of concussive fire into Ozai's thigh. The Fire Lord grunted, stumbling back a half-step. The audience felt the impact in their chests, a deep thump of displaced air. Ozai disengaged with a contemptuous swipe of his hand, unleashing a horizontal crescent of fire that forced Lu Ten to leap back. The distance reopened, and both masters settled into their true element, sheer, apocalyptic scale. Ozai began to weave. His hands moved in broad, imperial arcs, each motion pulling rivers of fire from the environment. From the left wall, a river. From the right, another. From the sand beneath Lu Ten, a third geyser erupted. He was not attacking with them individually, he was conducting. The rivers swirled around Lu Ten, forming a complex, rotating cage of intersecting flame jets, a three-dimensional labyrinth of instant death. The heat was so profound the air itself began to burn, creating brief, terrifying apparitions of spontaneous combustion in midair around the duelists. Lu Ten, trapped in the heart of the cage, did not panic. He became a vortex. Spinning on his good leg, he met every converging jet not with a block, but with a precise, knife-point counterblast. Pop his crack. The sounds were machine gun rapid, a percussive symphony of negation. He wasn't just defending, he was using Ozai's own power, deflecting the jets so they collided with each other, creating chains of secondary explosions that shook the cage. With a final, roaring expulsion of chi from his core, he expanded. His own fire aura swelled outwards in a perfect sphere, clashing against the confines of the cage in a titanic struggle of pressures. For 3 full seconds, they held, a sphere of furious orange contained within a lattice of gold, before the sphere ruptured Ozai's construct, blowing the cage apart in a shower of scattered, dying flames. Both men were breathing heavily now, chests heaving. Sweat evaporated the instant it formed. Ozai's hair was plastered to his scalp. Lu Ten's blood boiled away from his wounds before it could even drip. "You fight well for a ghost," Ozai snarled, his voice carrying a rasp of genuine effort for the first time. "But ghosts are made of memory. Let's see what you remember of this." He settled into the classic, unhurried stance. Left foot forward, right hand circling forward, left hand drawing back by his hip. The chaotic heat of the arena suddenly streamlined, drawn into the funnel of his form. The recognizable, terrifying hum of building energy began to layer over the roar of the remaining fires. Lightning generation. Lu Ten watched, his body screaming in protest. He saw the energy separating, the positive and negative gathering at Ozai's fingertips. He had no time for the graceful, flowing form of the true redirect. He had only Iroha's desperate, shouted lessons from a lifetime ago, drilled into him for a scenario exactly like this. As Ozai's fingertips flashed, the incandescent line of destruction lancing out, Lu Ten did not dodge. He planted his feet. His right hand shot up, fingers outstretched, catching the lightning bolt not in his palm, but in the space between his fingertips. A scream was torn from him, not of pain, but of immense, cosmic strain. The energy, pure violent chaos, surged into him. His body lit up from within, veins flashing blue-white under his skin. He could feel it shredding his pathways, a frozen fire in his blood. With a guttural roar, he brought his left hand across his body, the energy now screaming through his heart and out along his other arm. He didn't aim it at Ozai. He pointed his left index and middle finger straight up, towards the open sky of the arena. The lightning, his lightning now, shot from his fingers in a ragged, less controlled bolt, but a bolt nonetheless. It shrieked into the heavens, piercing the haze of smoke and heat, and grounded itself harmlessly in the clouds above with a distant, thunderous boom. The arena was stunned into utter silence. Ozai's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. It was more than a technique. It was a heresy. A ghost wielding the dragon of the West's ultimate secret. How? The word escaped Ozai's lips, a whisper of genuine, broken belief. Lu Ten sagged, smoke curling from his fingertips, his heart hammering a frantic, agonizing rhythm. My father, he gasped, taught me more than how to die. Fury, pure and unrefined, erupted from Ozai then. No more cold analysis, no more professional disdain. This was personal, dynasty-shattering rage. He abandoned all finesse. Lightning Generation became just another weapon in an avalanche of violence. He advanced, a tyrant unleashed. A whip of fire from his right hand aimed low to trip. Lu Ten jumped it. As Lu Ten was in the air, Ozai's left hand fired a concentrated lightning bolt, not at Lu Ten, but at the ground where he would land. Lu Ten twisted in midair, redirecting the energy at the last second, sending it into the wall. He landed off balance, and Ozai was on him, a blistering combo of fire-enhanced strikes, a fist to the gut that burst with concussive heat, a kick to the knee that Lu Ten barely blocked with a shin of solid flame. Each block sent waves of punishing force through Lu Ten's battered frame. Lu Ten gave ground, step by shuddering step, redirecting two more lightning bolts, one into the sand, one back at Ozai's feet, forcing the Fire Lord to leap aside. But redirection took a toll. Ozai's direct assault did not. Lu Ten's breath was sobbing, his vision spotting. He was a dam cracking under a relentless ocean. Ozai saw it. He feinted a massive two-handed fire blast. Lu Ten committed to a sweeping counter. As Lu Ten's guard opened, Ozai, with terrifying speed, generated a point-blank lightning spark in his palm, not a killing bolt, but a localized, paralyzing surge, and slammed it directly into Lu Ten's chest. Lu Ten did not scream. His body locked, every muscle seizing. He convulsed, the smell of ozone and burnt flesh thick around him, and collapsed to his knees. Ozai stood over him, chest heaving, his own exhaustion now visible in the tremor of his hands. He raised his hand one final time, fire and lightning crackling together around his fist, a swirling vortex of gold and blue-white. No more redirections. No more ghosts. Only ash. Lu Ten looked up from the sand. His eyes were glazed, his body broken. But deep within them, in a place the torture and the lightning and the fire could not reach, an ember glowed. Not of defiance. Of acceptance. Of a final, terrible unveiling. You're right, Lu Ten whispered, blood bubbling on his lips. No more ghosts. He placed his palms flat on the superheated sand. He did not draw on a breath. He let the last one out. And with it, he let go of the last restraint, the restraint that kept his fire orange, that kept it within the realm of the known, the understood, the tamed. The fire that erupted from him did not change color at first. It deepened from orange to the darkest, most profound crimson, the color of a heart's final beat. Then, as if consuming the very light around it, that crimson bled into something else. It became the absence of color, the antithesis of light. It was black, a living, moving darkness that burned with a cold, silent hunger. It was not flame as the world knew it. It was void-given fire. It swirled around him, and where it licked the sand didn't melt, it disappeared, leaving behind smooth, hollow pits of nothing. The heat radiating from it was not a wave, but a suffocating weight. It did not burn the skin, it promised to unravel the soul. The audience didn't cry out, they whimpered, a primal sound of terror as the very concept of fire was defiled before their eyes. Ozai's combined fire and lightning fist, the finishing blow, met this wall of black flame. It did not explode. It was consumed. Silently. Utterly. The gold and blue-white energy vanished into the blackness as if it had never been. Ozai stumbled back, his eyes wide with something beyond fear, with cosmic dread. Lu Ten rose. His movements were no longer pained, but eerily smooth, powered by this new, dreadful energy. The black fire clung to him like a shadow made solid. He looked at Ozai, and his voice, when it came, echoed with a resonance that seemed to come from the earth itself, cold and absolute. "You rule a nation of ashes," Lu Ten intoned, the black fire pulsing. "You wield fire as a child wields a knife. You think you are a dragon." He took a step forward, and the arena's very stone groaned beneath him. "You are a worm, hiding in a stolen crown." He raised a hand, wreathed in the silent, burning darkness. "Now, bow down to the black dragon of infamy." Chapter 133, The Dragon's Maw. The arena held its breath, choking on heat and dread. Lu Ten's final words, "bow down to the black dragon of infamy," did not echo. They sank into the silence, a stone dropped into a well of terror. The fire that clung to him was not flame as the world understood it. It was the color of a starless midnight, a living void that seemed to suck the light and hope from the very air. It did not crackle. It hissed, a sound like steam on cold iron, or a breath being permanently stolen. Ozai did not bow. The primal dread that had gripped him shattered, replaced by a fury so absolute it burned away reason. This was not just an attack on his life, but on the fundamental truth of his reign. Fire was his. His will, his right, his element. This absence was blasphemy. A parlor trick. Ozai's roar was a raw, ragged thing, stripped of its usual imperial control. A shadow play for a ghost. The sun's fire does not bow to the night. He proved it. Abandoning all caution, all strategy, he unleashed. This was not the controlled, overwhelming pressure of before. This was the raw, eruptive power of a volcano whose cap had been blown. He drew his arms back, and the very atmosphere of the arena seemed to tear. From the torches, the superheated sand, the molten stone weeping from the walls, fire was ripped in great, shrieking sheets. Not streams, but continents of flame, roaring into the space between them. He thrust his hands forward, and the fire obeyed, condensing not into a wave, but into a singular, colossal maw, the open jaws of a dragon forged from the heart of a star, 100 feet across, all gold and white and incandescent fury. It filled the arena from wall to wall, its teeth licking flames, and it surged forward to consume Lu Ten and his blasphemous dark flame whole. The heat was apocalyptic. In the upper rows, spectators screamed as their ornamental armor grew searing hot, their silks smoldering. The air itself tasted of ash and ending. Lu Ten, a lone figure before the dragon maw of his uncle's rage, did not flinch. He sank deeper into his stance, the black fire around him swirling faster, denser. As the titanic jaws descended, he did not meet it with a wall or a spear. He opened his own arms wide, as if in welcome. The golden dragon's maw crashed down upon him, engulfing him completely. The arena vanished in a holocaust of light and sound, a single, deafening roar that shook the city's foundations. Ozai, veins standing out on his neck and forehead, poured everything into it, feeding the annihilation, determined to scour even the memory of that black fire from existence. For 3 full seconds, the conflagration raged, a miniature sun burning on the sand. Then, a change. At the heart of the golden inferno, a darkness appeared. Not a shape, but a stain. It spread like ink in water, silent and inexorable. The roaring dragon's fire, it wasn't being pushed back. It was being consumed. Where the black stain spread, the brilliant gold and white simply vanished, leaving not even embers, just empty, superheated air. The stain grew, flowing up the streams of fire, towards their source. Ozai's eyes widened. He severed the flow, leaping back as the last of his great maw dissolved into the spreading nothingness. Where it had been, Lu Ten stood unharmed, the black fire around him now pulsing with a deeper, more sinister energy, as it fed. It was visibly larger, more substantial. "You see, uncle?" Lu Ten's voice was calm, carried on that same, dead hiss. "You do not command fire. You shout at it. True fire listens." Panic, cold and sharp, jabbed at Ozai's heart for the first time since his own father's chambers. He crushed it, replacing it with a colder, more focused intent. If raw power was being perverted, then he would use the power that could not be stolen. The power of perfect, cold control. He settled into the stance, his breathing forcibly evening out. The chaotic, suffocating heat of the arena began to streamline, pulled into the vortex of his will. The air tightened, hummed, charged. Crackling arcs of blue-white energy skittered over his arms, gathered at his fingertips. Lightning generation. He didn't aim for Lu Ten's body. He aimed for the arena floor directly at his feet. One bolt, then another, then a third in rapid succession, not to kill, but to trap. The lightning struck the sand, not exploding, but superheating it instantly into 3 points of bubbling, white-hot molten glass, forming a scalding triangle around Lu Ten. Then, as Lu Ten's attention shifted to the sudden, searing hazard at his feet, Ozai unleashed his true attack. He weaved his hands in a complex, circular pattern, and from the air above, he called down not fire, but a rain of it. Thousands of concentrated, lance-like bolts of blue-tipped flame, each moving with the precision of a master archer's arrow, shrieked down from 100 angles. It was a grid of death, designed to pierce and pin, leaving no room for the sweeping, consuming gestures of the black fire. Lu Ten was forced to move. He became a blur within his shroud of darkness, his hands a whirlwind of precise, sharp motions. But he did not use the black fire to defend. He used his own, normal, orange-gold fire. He spun, creating a whirling dome above him, deflecting the fiery lances in showers of sparks. He sliced his hands down, cutting through others with blades of concentrated flame. It was a breathtaking display of reactive, defensive bending, the skill of a master who had survived a long siege. But he was being pushed. Step by step, he was herded towards the searing pools of molten glass. Ozai watched, a grim satisfaction returning. The ghost was skilled, but he was still just a bender. The black fire was a trick, a shield, not a weapon that could overcome true, disciplined mastery. As Lu Ten's heel came within an inch of a glass pool, Ozai struck the final blow. With Lu Ten fully occupied with the rain of fire, Ozai generated one final, perfect bolt of lightning. Not from a grand motion, but from a single, thrusting finger. It was a beam of pure, focused destruction, faster than sight, aimed unerringly for the center of Lu Ten's whirling defense. Lu Ten saw it. There was no time for the redirection form. In that split second, he did the only thing he could. He let the black fire that hugged his torso flare. The lightning bolt struck the edge of the expanding sphere of darkness. It did not detonate. It did not ground. It was absorbed. The black fire rippled like a dark pond accepting a stone, and for an instant, a network of crackling blue-white energy traced through the void like flames before being snuffed out utterly. The black fire pulsed again, stronger, hungrier. And Lu Ten smiled. A true, terrible smile. "Thank you," he rasped. He stopped retreating. He planted his foot, ignoring the blistering heat from the nearby glass. The defensive orange fire around his hands winked out. He raised his arms, and the black fire, now thrumming with a stolen, volatile energy, responded. Ozai's rain of fire was still falling. Lu Ten looked up at it, and with a slow, pulling motion of his hands, he did not deflect the lances. He caught them. The blue-tipped bolts of fire, upon touching the field of black fire that now radiated from him, did not vanish immediately. They streaked into the darkness, and were absorbed, their color leaching from vibrant gold and blue to a dull, ashen gray, and then deepening into pure, solid black. Each absorbed lance strengthened the shroud around him, making it thicker, more tangible. He wasn't just blocking Ozai's fire, he was converting it. "No," Ozai whispered, his confidence crumbling. Lu Ten began to walk forward. The pools of molten glass he approached did not deter him. The black fire around his legs reached down. Where it touched the glowing, viscous liquid, the radiant heat died instantly. The glass did not cool, it turned a dead, opaque obsidian, its light stolen. Ozai roared in denial. He attacked with everything he had left, a continuous, hurricane-force blast of fire from his mouth, combined with whip-fast strikes of lightning from his hands. It was a storm of elemental fury, a testament to his status as the most powerful firebender in the world. Lu Ten walked into it. The golden fire from Ozai's breath hit the wall of black flame and was siphoned into it, the color draining like blood from a wound, turning into more swirling darkness. The lightning bolts stabbed into the gloom, flickered with captured energy for a moment, and were consumed. With every step Lu Ten took, the black fire grew. It was no longer a shroud. It was becoming an aura, a swirling vortex of anti-flame that expanded with every joule of energy Ozai futilely poured into it. It absorbed the light, the heat, the very sound of the barrage, leaving a terrifying, hissing silence in its wake. Ozai was driven back, not by force, but by the creeping, inevitable advance of this consuming void. His breaths came in ragged, panicked gasps. His hair, freed from its topknot, was plastered to his sweaty, soot-streaked face. The God King was gone. In his place was a man facing something he could not dominate, could not even comprehend. Lu Ten stopped 10 paces away. The black fire around him was a miniature typhoon of darkness, spinning silently, absorbing the torchlight from the very walls. He looked at his uncle, his eyes the only points of burning gold in the shadow. "Your fire is mine, Ozai," Lu Ten said, his voice the hiss of the void itself. "Your lightning is mine. Your throne is mine. You built your kingdom on a lie. I will build mine on the truth that consumes all lies." He raised a single hand, pointing at the exhausted, horrified Fire Lord. The black fire coalesced along his arm, forming a perfect, swirling sphere of nothingness in his palm. "This is the true heart of fire," Lu Ten intoned. "Not creation. Not destruction. Consumption. The dragon does not roar. It feeds. And I am starving." The sphere of black fire pulsed, ready to be unleashed, the final, converting doom, the weapon forged from Ozai's own stolen power. The dragon's maw had opened, and it was hungry. Chapter 134, The Real Fire Lord. The sphere of black fire pulsed in Lu Ten's palm, a perfect orb of silent, hungry oblivion. It did not crackle or roar, it sat there, warping the light around it, a hole in the world that promised not just death, but absolute erasure. Ozai stared at it, his chest heaving, his royal armor scorched and smoking. The God King facade was in ashes. What remained was a raw, panting animal, cornered by a predator it could not understand. He had nothing left. His greatest attacks had been siphoned, converted, turned into fuel for the very abomination advancing on him. His spirit, that unshakable core of tyrannical will, was fraying at the edges, touched by a cold, creeping terror. He was the Fire Lord, and he was about to be unmade by a fire that was not fire. Lu Ten took the final step, closing the distance. He held the sphere aloft, his eyes twin coals in the shadow of his own making. "The sun sets on your reign, uncle." With a scream that was equal parts defiance and despair, Ozai did not bend. He attacked with the only thing he had left, his body. He lunged, not with fire, but with a desperate, martial strike, his fingers clawed for his nephew's throat. It was the move of a street brawler, not a master. It was surrender. Lu Ten's free hand snapped up, catching Ozai's wrist in a vice-like grip. The touch was searingly cold, a chill that burned deeper than any flame. At the same moment, he pressed the sphere of black fire not into Ozai's chest, but against the center of his own uncle's sternum. Ozai stiffened, a gasp ripped from him. He expected annihilation. It did not come. Instead, the black fire flowed. It did not burn or consume Ozai's flesh. It seeped into him, through the skin, through the bone, into the very core of his being, his chi pathways, the seat of his bending. It was an invasion, not of the body, but of the spirit. Ozai's eyes flew wide. He felt a coldness spreading from his center, a void where the roaring, sun-bright furnace of his power had always blazed. He tried to summon a spark, a wisp of flame. Nothing answered. He was a hollow gourd. The connection, the glorious, violent connection to the element that had been his identity, his right, his joy, and his weapon since childhood, was gone. Not blocked. Not drained. Converted. The black fire within him settled, a dormant, silent stone where his inner flame had been. It did not hurt. It was a perfect, chilling absence. Lu Ten released his wrist. Ozai stumbled back, collapsing to his knees on the glass-littered sand. He looked at his own hands, turning them over. He focused with all his will, his face a mask of straining desperation. Not a wisp of smoke. Not a flicker of heat. The greatest firebender in the world had been rendered utterly, permanently inert. The silence in the arena was total. The hiss of the black fire had faded as Lu Ten allowed it to recede back into his own form, leaving him standing, battered and bloody but impossibly upright, over the kneeling, broken form of the Fire Lord. The crowd did not cheer. They did not gasp. They were too stunned, too terrified, too fundamentally lost. The world had just been inverted. Lu Ten turned from Ozai, as if the man was already part of the scenery. He lifted his gaze to the stunned, silent thousands. His voice, when it came, was not the hissing void whisper, nor the ragged croak of the wounded ghost. It was clear, resonant, and carried the absolute authority of a verdict. The Agni Kai is concluded. He let the words hang, ensuring every soul understood the finality. By the sacred traditions of our ancestors, by the will of fire made manifest, I, Lu Ten, son of Iroh, grandson of Azulin, the true and rightful heir to the dragon throne, am victorious. He took a painful, deliberate step forward, his ruined leg buckling only for him to lock it straight through sheer will. He was a tapestry of wounds, but he wore them like regalia. Look upon him, he commanded, thrusting a finger toward the kneeling Ozai. Look upon the pretender. He who stole a throne through patricide and fear. He who built an empire on lies and called it strength. His fire is gone. Not defeated. Revoked. The element itself has judged him and found him unworthy. He paused, his golden eyes sweeping the tears, meeting the terrified stares of generals, nobles, and commoners alike. My father mourned a son and lost a nation. I died a soldier and have returned a king. I did not come for vengeance alone. I came for restoration. The Fire Nation has lost its way. It has become a beast, all jaws and rage, consuming everything, our enemies, our allies, our own soul, and finding only ash in its belly. This ends now. He raised his fists, and this time, he called not the black fire, but pure, roaring, crimson gold flame. It erupted from him not in a destructive blast, but in two magnificent, swirling pillars that rose to the arena's roof before arcing together in a great, fiery emblem of the royal crest above his head. It was a display of colossal, controlled power, but it was normal fire. Familiar. Traditional. A bridge from the terrifying unknown back to the known world. Hear my will. Lu Ten's voice boomed, amplified by the dome of fire above him. The war of conquest is over. As of this moment, all offensive operations beyond our sovereign borders are to cease. Recall our fleets. Secure our holdings. This is not a retreat. It is a reassembly. We will turn our fury inward, not on our own people, but on the corruption, the rot, the fear that has festered in our heart. We will rebuild what Sozin broke. We will become a nation worthy of its power, a civilization, not just an army. He let the fiery crest dissipate into a warm, glowing haze that settled over the arena, driving back the lingering chill of the black fire. Ozai is deposed. His reign is nullified, his decrees void. He will live, Lu Ten declared, his gaze falling once more to the hunched, silent figure of his uncle. To see the world he broke healed without him. To bear witness to the dawn he tried to prevent. His life is mine to take, and I choose to let it stand as a monument to mercy, and to failure. He then turned his head, his eyes finding the petrified faces of the high generals and sages in the royal box. Sages! You who are sworn to tradition and lineage. You witnessed this Agni Kai. You heard the challenge. You see the result. Fulfill your duty. The lead sage, an ancient man with a beard of white smoke, looked from the terrifyingly powerful victor to the utterly broken deposed lord. The law was ancient, clear, and inflexible. He stood on trembling legs. He had backed Ozai for years, but Ozai's fire was gone. The spirit of the duel, the very will of Agni, seemed undeniable. With a voice that quavered but carried, the lead sage spoke the ritual words. By the sacred right of Agni Kai, before the eyes of heaven and nation, the fire has judged. The victor is Lu Ten, son of Iroh. The throne is his. He paused, the weight of history crushing the air from his lungs, then he bowed, deep and low. All hail! Fire Lord Lu Ten. For a second, there was only silence. Then, in the military sections, officers who had been contacted by the order, who had felt the changing wind, stood. They slammed their fists over their hearts in the Fire Nation salute. The gesture spread like a wave, first through the ranks of those who saw opportunity, then through those paralyzed by fear, and finally through the masses who were simply awed by the raw, transformative power they had witnessed. The arena, which had held its breath for an hour, released it in a single, thunderous, rolling roar. All hail Fire Lord Lu Ten. The sound was tectonic. It was not yet love, nor true loyalty. It was a surrender to power, to inevitability, to the sheer shock of the old world breaking. But it was allegiance. Lu Ten, Fire Lord Lu Ten, stood amidst the acclaim, the epicenter of the storm he had crafted. He did not smile. He accepted it as his due. His eyes looked past the cheers, past the arena, to the palace spires silhouetted against the darkening sky. The hardest part was over. He had taken the throne from the most powerful man in the world. Now came the true fight, ruling what was left. On his knees, Ozai heard none of it. The cheers were a distant mockery. He stared only at his cold, useless hands, feeling the perfect, silent void within. He was not a man. He was a tomb. The roar of the arena faded into a memory, replaced by the dense, living silence of an Earth Kingdom forest. It was a world away from scorched sand and the smell of ozone. Here, the air was cool and damp, thick with the scent of loam, blooming night flowers, and ancient, sleeping moss. Starlight, fractured by a million leaves, dappled the forest floor in silver and shadow. This deep in the wilderness, no news of coups or duels could penetrate. There was only the primordial quiet. It was broken by a slow, deliberate tread. A figure emerged from between the gargantuan trunks of ancient banyan trees, moving with an unnatural, gliding grace. It was shrouded in massive, tattered robes of a deep, burnt crimson, the fabric so dark it drank the moonlight, making the wearer a walking piece of the night itself. The robes hid all features, all form, leaving only an impression of immense, patient presence. The figure stopped in a small clearing where a shaft of pure moonlight fell like a pillar from the heavens. Before it, the air shimmered. Not with heat, but with a distortion of reality itself. From this shimmer, a form coalesced. It was transparent, wavering like a mirage, yet its details were unerringly sharp, a tall, elegant silhouette that seemed woven from starlight and memory. It had no true face, only a sense of profound, ageless awareness. This was no mere spirit. This was an echo of something older than nations, a phantom of primordial intent. The forest held its breath. The insects ceased their chirping. The very wind died. The figure in the red robes inclined its head, a gesture of deep, abiding reverence. Its voice, when it spoke, was a dry rustle, like pages turning in a forgotten tomb. My lord. Your design unfolds. The prison weakens. I am anchored once more to the physical world. The phantom did not speak with a mouth. Its voice manifested in the mind of the robed figure and in the clearing itself, a sound both deep and mesmerizing, each syllable vibrating with the weight of epics. The vessel of Rava still lives. The cycle persists. The Avatar's breath yet warms the world. There is a disruption, the robed figure rustled. A new fire burns in the heart of the foreigner. It is not the flame we accounted for. All flames cast shadows. Some shadows serve us. The new Fire Lord is a consequence, not a cause. He is a stone dropped in a pond, the ripples are of no concern. Your purpose remains. You are to stay hidden from the eyes of the world and the Avatar. The time for revelation is not now. Find your one whose breath mirrors yours in the dark. Only together, with life given anew, can the final gate be opened. The phantom's form wavered, beginning to dissolve back into the shimmering air. Go! Weave the threads from the deep places. The world busies itself with thrones and wars. Let them. While they fight for scraps of land, we prepare the ground for the harvest of ages. It will be done, my lord, the red-robed figure whispered, bowing lower. The phantom was gone. The clearing was just a clearing again, filled with ordinary moonlight and the slow return of cricket song. The figure in red stood motionless for a long time. Then, it turned, the vast crimson robes swirling silently, and glided back into the impenetrable darkness of the forest, leaving no footprint, no trace, only a lingering sense of a cold, patient eye opening in the heart of the world where none could see. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in part 12. Peace.